Have you ever wondered why people tolerate what they once swore they'd never accept? Why red flags slip past unnoticed until it's too late? It's because manipulation rarely storms in with force. It seeps in slowly, hidden in words, gestures, and illusions that rewire how you think, feel, and react. From silent tactics like gradual normalization to traps buried in language, from stolen reputations to false victimhood. These psychological games shape relationships, workplaces, and entire societies without us realizing it. This video will uncover the unseen patterns that control your choices and keep you trapped in invisible cages. Once you see them, you'll never unsee them. And that awareness is your greatest weapon. Exit denial. There is a hidden force that keeps people trapped in situations they don't want to be in, a force so subtle that it doesn't use chains, locks, or walls. It works quietly by reshaping the meaning of leaving. This force is called exit denial. At first glance, it looks harmless. Nobody is holding you down, nobody is blocking the door. In fact, the door is wide open. Yet, when you try to walk toward it, something inside you hesitates. You pause, you second-guess yourself. You feel the invisible weight of eyes, of judgment, of guilt pressing against your back. That is the trap of exit denial, the transformation of departure from a simple choice into a social crime. Think about a child sitting at a long family dinner. They've eaten, they're full, they want to leave the table and go play. The door to their room is right there, but before they can stand up, a parent says, "If you go now, everyone will know you don't care about this family." Suddenly, the act of leaving is no longer neutral. It has been reframed as selfishness, as betrayal. The child doesn't want to stay, yet they remain seated because the price of walking away has been artificially raised. That small moment plants a seed. Leaving can be seen as proof of disloyalty, and staying, even against your will, becomes the safer option. Exit denial shows up in workplaces all the time. Picture a meeting that has already dragged on for an hour longer than it should. You've said your part, your work is done, and all you want is to return to your desk. But the manager notices you shifting and says, "If you leave, people will think you're not a team player." That single sentence rewrites the meaning of standing up. Now you aren't just leaving a room, you're signaling disloyalty to the team. You can feel the silent gaze of your colleagues, and you sit back down. The chairs around the table weigh more heavily than the walls of the building itself. You stay, not because you want to, but because leaving has been transformed into a public statement you never intended to make. Sometimes exit denial is quiet, almost invisible. Imagine a friend who always says, "Oh, leaving already?" They don't shout, they don't insult you, but the tone alone is enough to create hesitation. Their words carry a subtle layer of judgment. And the next time you consider leaving early, you remember that tone, that small sting of shame. You stay a little longer than you want to, not because you're enjoying yourself, but because you want to avoid that invisible accusation. Over time, this pattern steals hours, even years, from people's lives. But exit denial is at its most powerful when used by groups, religious movements, political organizations, even families, who frame departure not as a choice but as betrayal. A member who quits may be told they are abandoning God, turning their back on truth, or betraying their people. The group warns them that if they leave, they will lose their friends, their family, their entire identity. Stories circulate about those who left, painting them as broken, corrupt, or cursed. The message is brutally clear. Leaving is not just walking away, it is walking into ruin. So, people stay, even when belief has long faded, even when the group has become a cage, because the fear of exile outweighs the desire for freedom. The same trap shows up in ordinary life. Think of sales. You walk into a store just to browse. The clerk is helpful, smiling, and brings you pair after pair of shoes. You try them on, but none of them feel right. You hesitate. Then the clerk says, "I've worked so hard finding the right style for you." Now, walking out empty-handed no longer feels like simply leaving a store. It feels like wasting someone's effort, as if you owe them a purchase. And so you buy shoes you didn't want, not because you were persuaded by their quality, but because leaving was made to feel like a crime. Family traditions are another form of exit denial. Imagine a holiday dinner that no one enjoys anymore. The food is bland, the atmosphere tense, and everyone would rather be somewhere else. Yet if you dare skip 1 year, the family says, "So you don't love us enough to be here." Suddenly, not attending isn't just skipping a dinner, it's framed as disowning the family. People show up year after year, not out of love, but out of guilt. Attendance becomes proof of loyalty, and avoidance becomes betrayal. Social groups operate the same way. Think of a book club you joined for fun. At first it was enjoyable, but soon it became more about gossip than reading. You want to quit, but you've noticed something. Every time someone leaves, the group mocks them, calling them flaky or unserious. You can already hear what they'll say about you. You picture their laughter, their whispers, their judgment. And so, you keep going, smiling at the right times while wishing you were home. The cost of leaving is humiliation, and so you pay the cost of staying instead. Exit denial can even hide inside compliments. A boss might say, "I don't know what we'd do without you." On the surface it sounds kind, but underneath it ties your presence to the survival of the group. If you leave, you're not just choosing another path. You're causing collapse. The guilt is overwhelming. You stay, not because the work fulfills you, but because you are afraid of being the one who let everyone down. The trap becomes even stronger when sunk costs are involved. You've spent years in a relationship, a career, or a project. You want to leave, but someone reminds you, after all this time, you're just going to walk away? That line doesn't erase your unhappiness, but it reframes your departure as waste. Now leaving means throwing away years of effort, and the pressure doubles. So you stay, silencing your doubts, letting the trap tighten around you. At its most powerful, exit denial fuses belonging with identity. Think of someone raised in a tight-knit religious community where every friend, teacher, and family member belongs. To leave is not just to quit a group, it's to step into a world where you are no longer recognized, where your old name is a curse. You're not just leaving meetings, you're losing yourself. Exit denial here does not whisper, it shouts. The fear of being no one outweighs the misery of staying. Even in intimate relationships, the tactic shows up in brutal ways. A partner may say, "If you loved me, you wouldn't leave." That line transforms leaving into proof of heartlessness. Even if you do love them, the accusation lingers. You hesitate. You stay. Not to be happy, but to avoid being misunderstood, to escape the crushing label of being unloving. Why does this work so powerfully? Because humans fear exclusion more than almost anything. For most of history, to be cast out meant death. Our brains are still wired that way. Rejection feels like danger, like the loss of survival itself. Exit denial hijacks this primal fear. It makes walking away feel like self-destruction. You sweat, your chest tightens, your body screams to stay, even while your mind begs to go. The trap is complete. And here's the truth. Exit denial isn't always born from cruelty. Sometimes it's unconscious. A lonely parent guilts their child into staying, not to harm them, but to ease their own pain. A friend shames you for leaving early, not to control you, but because they're afraid of being abandoned. But intention doesn't change the effect. Exit denial raises the cost of leaving so high that staying feels like the only choice. The chains of exit denial are invisible, but they are heavy. They're made of guilt, of shame, of fear of judgment. And unless you learn to see them, you may live your life sitting at tables you no longer want to be at, smiling in rooms where you no longer belong, trapped in jobs, groups, and relationships you should have left long ago. The first step to breaking free is recognition. Once you see exit denial for what it is, a manipulation of meaning, a trap built out of emotion, you can remind yourself that leaving is not betrayal, not abandonment, not selfishness. Sometimes leaving is the most honest, most courageous, most loving choice you can make. Cognitive overload. There is a kind of pressure that doesn't come from yelling, threats, or force. It doesn't strike you head on. Instead, it floods you, drowns you in so much detail, so much noise, so much raw information that your brain simply gives up. This is the tactic of cognitive overload. It is not about helping you understand more, it is about burying you under too much. It's not like eating a large meal, heavy but possible. It's more like trying to drink from a fire hose, where the sheer volume makes it impossible to swallow anything. When the flood arrives, the mind searches for the path of least resistance, and that path is almost always surrender. Picture yourself at a town hall, asking a politician a simple question: how will this policy affect us? Instead of answering directly, the politician begins pouring out a storm of statistics, committee names, legal jargon, and acronyms. At first, you try to follow. You take notes. You hold on to one number while the next three rush past. Within minutes, your focus shatters. You feel behind, confused, unsure of where to even start. And then something happens inside you. You stop questioning. You stop resisting. Overload itself becomes the weapon. The politician doesn't need to convince you. They only need to drown you. Salespeople use this tactic constantly. Imagine walking into a showroom to look at a new phone. Instead of explaining the basics clearly, the salesperson begins listing off dozens of features, technical specifications, warranty clauses, and add-ons. At first, you want to compare carefully, but each new detail makes the task harder. Just when you think you understand, they hit you with another layer. After a while, your mind feels too tired to fight. The simplest escape is to trust the salesperson's suggestion. You don't buy because you're convinced. You buy because you're exhausted. The overload sees. At itself, close the deal. Workplaces are filled with cognitive overload. A worker asks a manager about a confusing new policy. The manager responds by sending a flood of attachments, links, regulations, and cross-references. At first, the worker reads, but soon the pile feels endless. The message is clear. Stop asking. The policy doesn't stand because it is understood. It stands because resistance feels impossible under the weight of too much information. Authority makes overload even stronger. In military briefings, new recruits are bombarded with endless coordinates, codes, and references. Veterans nod along, but the new ones sit in silence, overwhelmed. They assume it must be their fault for not keeping up. In hospitals, patients often face the same wall. A doctor speaks in rapid bursts of lab values, dosages, and medical terms. The patient nods along, not because they understand, but because the storm of data pushes them into agreement. Overload silences questions before they can even form. Think about a courtroom. A lawyer cross-examines a witness, firing question after question filled with dates, names, and numbers. Even if the questions are weak, the witness struggles to keep up. They falter, stumble, look confused. To the jury, that confusion looks like dishonesty. The lawyer wins not by truth, but by sheer volume. Overload has tilted the scale. This tactic thrives in politics as well. During debates, one candidate might unleash a barrage of statistics, one after another. Their opponent doesn't have enough time to respond to all of them. They may refute one, but four more go unchallenged. To the audience, it looks like weakness, as if the opponent had no answers. The overload creates the illusion of victory. And in the digital world, cognitive overload is everywhere. Social media floods us with endless claims, links, charts, and counter-arguments. No one has the time to fact-check every piece. Instead, people rely on impressions, repetition, or emotion. Whoever floods the most content often looks the most convincing. Conspiracy theories thrive on this. A video strings together dozens of scattered facts, coincidences, and jargon. To debunk each claim takes enormous time and effort. Most people don't bother. They assume there must be truth buried inside the chaos. Overload itself becomes the proof. Even education can be twisted by this tactic. A teacher who dumps facts without structure leaves students drowning in details. They stop asking questions and instead memorize fragments without understanding. Compliance replaces curiosity. The method works because students feel too overwhelmed to resist. In this way, education can mirror sales, politics, or propaganda. Volume replaces clarity, and the overload creates obedience. Why does cognitive overload work so well? Because the human brain is limited. Our working memory can only hold a handful of pieces at once. When those slots are full, new information pushes the old out. At that point, the mind takes shortcuts. One of those shortcuts is trust. If someone sounds confident while flooding us with details, it feels safer to yield than to risk being wrong. The brain itself is wired to give in when the load gets too heavy. Think of juggling. You can keep a few balls in the air, add more, and you can still manage for a while. But keep adding, and at some point you drop everything. In life, when people drop the mental balls, they often give up control. They let the thrower, the person who created the overload, decide what matters. By the time they realize the flood had no real coherence, the decision has already been made. This pattern shows up in city hearings and local politics as well. Imagine residents coming to discuss one proposal, expecting clarity. Instead, officials present slides stacked with tax projections, legal notes, environmental studies, and financial forecasts. People lose track. Only a few manage comments, and even those sound scattered. The decision passes without true challenge. Overload has silenced the community without a fight. On a personal level, overload can win arguments in relationships. One partner unleashes a long list of grievances all at once. The other cannot possibly respond to every point. They give up, fall silent, or concede just to end the storm. The argument is not won by reason, but by exhaustion. Modern life itself has normalized overload. News channels stack graphics, tickers, headlines, commentary, and visuals all at once. At work, inboxes flood with endless emails, meetings stretch with seed after slide, and notifications pile up non-stop. Slowly, people stop resisting. The employee who once questioned policies becomes the one who clicks approve without reading. Resistance doesn't vanish because the arguments are convincing. It vanishes because the brain is simply too tired to fight anymore. This is the quiet power of cognitive overload. It doesn't need truth, it doesn't need logic, it doesn't even need coherence. All it needs is scale. All it needs is to overwhelm you long enough for you to surrender. And most of the time, you don't even notice it happening. The only defense is awareness. When you feel your brain drowning in information, pause, step back, ask yourself, is this clarity or is this chaos designed to shut me down? Not all floods of detail are attempts at control, but when you notice the fatigue, the confusion, the urge to simply give in, that's when you must be most alert. Because overload is not just a mistake of communication, it's a tactic of power. Phantom comparison, one of the most powerful ways people are controlled, is not through rules, punishments, or threats, but through shadows. Comparisons to invisible rivals who may not even exist. This is the tactic of phantom comparison. It works by convincing you that others are better, stronger, more obedient, or more loyal than you. The rivals are faceless, unseen, and often imagined. But that doesn't matter. Humans are wired to measure themselves against others, and so the phantom becomes real inside your mind. You don't need proof. You don't need evidence. The simple suggestion that others wouldn't act this way is enough to push you into compliance. Think of a child refusing to do homework. The parent doesn't argue about learning or responsibility. Instead, they say, "Other kids your age don't fight like this. They just sit down and do it." The child has no way to check. They can't interview every other child. But the claim carries power. If they resist, they aren't just disobeying. They are falling behind an invisible crowd. They imagine a line of better children, all obedient, all hard-working, and themselves as the odd one out. The parent has set up a race against a phantom, and the child runs not to learn, but to avoid being the loser. Romantic relationships are full of this tactic. A partner might sigh and say, "No one else would put up with what I put up with." Suddenly, you're not just dealing with their complaint. You're measured against a faceless army of people who would have already walked away. You don't see them, you don't know them, but you feel them judging you. Doubt creeps in. Maybe you are failing. Maybe you're lucky they've stayed. And so you bend, you comply, not out of love, but out of fear of not measuring up to an invisible standard. Workplaces use phantom comparison all the time. An employee raises a concern about policy. The manager replies, "Everyone else has no problem with it. You're the only one making this difficult." Now the employee feels isolated. They picture their colleagues nodding along while they alone resist. Even if others share doubts, the claim erases that possibility. The phantom group becomes a wall, pressing the individual back into line. They fall silent, not because they agree, but because the imagined crowd has already judged them. Salespeople weaponize phantom comparison with precision. A hesitant customer studies a product, unsure if it's worth buying. The salesperson leans in and says, "Most people buy this without even thinking twice. You're different." Suddenly, hesitation itself feels like failure. The customer imagines a mass of happy, decisive buyers, all smarter, quicker, better than them. To avoid being the odd one out, they buy. The rivals never had to exist. The shadow of their imagined presence was enough. Social groups are fueled by phantom comparison. A teenager doesn't want to go to a party. Their friend says, Everyone else is going. You don't want to be the only one missing out, do you? The phantom here is the entire peer circle painted as unified. To stay home is to risk exclusion, to risk hearing stories you can't join. The teen imagines themselves left out, laughed at, forgotten. That fear alone drags them into a night they never wanted. Parents often turn themselves into phantom rivals. A child complains about chores. The parent says, "When I was your age, I never argued. I just did what I was told." The rival here isn't another child. It's the parent's younger self, perfected in memory. The child is being measured against a story, not reality, and stories can't be challenged. The standard is unreachable because it never existed, but the child still chases it, carrying the weight of failure. In more coercive groups, phantom comparison becomes a weapon of control. A leader may tell members, "Others are more committed than you. They give more. They sacrifice more. You need to catch up." The others may not exist, or if they do, their devotion may be exaggerated beyond recognition. But the message is the same. You are behind, you are weak, you are failing. The member works harder, not toward a real goal, but to escape judgment from rivals they cannot see. Romantic manipulation often leans on this trick. A partner might say, "Any other man would treat me better," or "Any other woman would appreciate me more." The rival is generic, faceless, impossible to argue against. The message lands, you are failing where countless invisible others would succeed. Fear of being inadequate drives compliance. Love becomes a race you can never win, because the phantom always has the upper hand. Even casual remarks carry this shadow. A teacher tells a struggling student, "Other kids don't need this much help." A coach tells an athlete, "Your teammates push harder than you." These comments might be framed as motivation, but they isolate instead. The student pictures a classroom of better learners. The athlete imagines a team of tireless workers. They push themselves not for growth, but out of shame. The phantom rivals become the silent push that keeps them moving. Phantom comparison thrives because we are trained from childhood to measure ourselves against others. Grades, rankings, scores, performance charts. All of it tells us that our worth is not in who we are, but in how we compare. Phantom comparison twists that instinct. Instead of a real person to measure against, the rival is vague, false, or impossible. But the brain reacts the same way. You feel the sting of being behind. You feel the pressure to catch up. And so you conform, even when the standard is smoke. What makes phantom comparison especially cruel is that it leaves you no defense. If someone insults you directly, you can argue. If they set a clear rule, you can choose to accept or reject it. But if they summon phantom rivals, you can't grip anything. You can't argue with people who aren't there. You can't fight shadows. The phantom is always better, stronger, more loyal. You can never win. You can only struggle not to be the worst. The fear of being alone sharpens the blade. Most people would rather bend than risk standing out. When you are told you're the only one resisting, you picture a crowd watching, whispering, judging. The shame feels unbearable. So you surrender, not because the demand made sense, but because the thought of being the odd one was too heavy. Sometimes phantom comparison isn't even malicious. A parent might say, "Other kids behave better," as a clumsy attempt at discipline. A boss might say, "Other employees manage fine," out of frustration. But the effect is the same. The listener feels small, pressured to measure up to ghosts. They act not from choice, but to escape shame. This tactic works because your mind fills in the missing details. If someone says, "Everyone else agrees," you don't need proof. You imagine faces, nodding heads, judgment. Your imagination does the work the manipulator couldn't. That's the cruel genius of phantom comparison. The rival doesn't need to exist, because your brain creates them for you. To break free, you have to pause and ask, who are these others? Do they even exist? Most of the time they don't, and even when they do, they are not you. Their path is not yours. Their choices are not your standard. Phantom comparison is a trap built from shadows, and the only way to escape is to stop racing against ghosts. Strategic timing. There's an old saying. It's not just what you say, it's when you say it. Few tactics capture that truth as sharply as strategic timing. Unlike other methods of influence that rely on arguments, pressure, or deception, this one operates through patience. It's about striking at the right moment. Not too early when resistance is strong, not too late when the chance has passed. People are not equally strong at every hour of the day. Fatigue, distraction, stress, hunger, or even hope can tilt the balance of decision-making. The exact same request that would be rejected in one moment can slide through effortlessly in another. Strategic timing isn't about overpowering someone's will. It's about waiting until their guard is low and then slipping past it. Think of a child who wants permission to stay out late. They know better than to ask in the middle of the day when their parent is alert, busy, and sharp. Instead, they wait until after work, when the parent is tired, sitting at the dinner table, too weary for a long argument. At that moment, the child makes the request. The parent waves a hand and says, "Fine, go." The difference wasn't in the words, it was in the moment. Fatigue did the work. In workplaces, timing is everything. An employee with a bold idea knows not to bring it up during a tense budget meeting when the manager is scrutinizing every cost. Instead, they wait until the end of the day, when the manager is drained and eager to go home. The pitch is made in passing, and the manager, too tired to dig into the details, says, "Sure, let's give it a try." That single nod can shape the course of a project, not because the idea was flawless, but because the moment was perfectly chosen. Distraction opens similar doors. Imagine a colleague who wants you to cover part of their shift. If they ask when you're calm and focused, you might weigh the cost carefully and say no. But if they catch you in the middle of answering emails, fielding calls, and juggling interruptions, you might say yes just to move on. The decision isn't the result of careful thought. It's the product of strategic timing. By slipping the request into a gap in your attention, they bypassed your defenses. This tactic plays out on the grandest stages as well. In politics, timing can decide entire laws. Legislators often push controversial bills late at night, after hours of exhausting debate. By then, opponents are tired, the public is distracted, and scrutiny has faded. The bill passes not because it was strong, but because people were weak. Timing carried it across the line. The same principle holds in personal relationships. A spouse who wants to make a questionable purchase might wait until their partner is stressed about something else. In that state, the partner may agree just to avoid one more argument. Later, they might regret it, but the decision is already sealed. Strategic timing thrives in these moments where relief matters more than resistance. Retailers use this tactic against us every day. Candy, gum, and snacks sit by the checkout lane for a reason. Shoppers have already walked the aisles, made countless choices, stood in line, and used up their patience. At that point, resisting one more decision feels hard. Grabbing the candy is easy. The product hasn't changed. Your mental state has. Strategic timing turned no thanks into why not. Even governments lean on this tactic during times of crisis, when fear runs high, when citizens are overwhelmed by constant media coverage and uncertainty. Leaders often push through measures that would meet resistance in calmer times. People accept restrictions, spending, or new rules not because they fully agree, but because the timing makes them feel powerless to resist. Fear and fatigue create a compliance. The legal system provides some of the starkest examples. Police interrogations often stretch long into the night. The suspect grows tired, hungry, and desperate for rest. After hours of questioning, the request to sign a confession feels like an escape. Compliance comes not from guilt, but from exhaustion. The words didn't change, the timing did. The same strategy shows up in everyday arguments. A partner raises a sensitive issue right before bed, knowing the other won't want to start a long discussion. They win, not by persuasion, but by choosing a moment when resistance is lowest. Strategic timing is everywhere, often unnoticed. A roommate asks for money when you're rushing out the door. A coworker asks for help while you're swamped with tasks. A friend asks for a favor while you're upset about something else, knowing you'll agree just to avoid more conflict. None of these rely on clever words. They rely on catching you off guard. Salespeople take it further. A car dealer drags out the buying process with endless paperwork. By the time the buyer is exhausted and just wants to leave, they introduce add-ons and extra warranties. The customer, worn down, says yes, just to finish. The product hasn't changed. Their state of mind has. Why does this tactic work so well? Because human energy and focus aren't constant. Fatigue reduces self-control. Stress narrows your attention. Distraction makes it harder to weigh options. Vulnerability makes relief more attractive than resistance. Strategic timing doesn't fight your will. It waits for the natural cycles of your mind to make you more pliant. The power of timing lies in subtlety. Unlike open force, it feels invisible. When you look back, you often think, I chose freely. You don't notice how your state of mind was exploited. The manipulation hides in the clock, not the words. Organizations even institutionalize timing. Visual, tests scheduled on weekends, announcements made during holidays, policy changes rolled out at the end of the week when attention is lowest. These are not accidents. They are shields. By releasing news when people are distracted or tired, leaders dull the backlash before it begins. Group leaders do it too. A volunteer team questions a decision. The leader frames it as, we can either decide tonight or risk losing momentum. Fatigue makes the group agree just to move on. Timing shapes the outcome more than the content. The same applies to classrooms. A teacher might assign extra work at the end of a long lesson when students just want to leave. Most nod along, not because they want to, but because the timing catches them off guard. Even parenting leans on it. A parent might say, brush your teeth now or later, your choice. The timing of the request, right before bedtime, ensures it gets done. The child feels like they had a choice, but the real decision was already locked in. The truth is, humans don't stand at full strength all day. We rise and fall, alert in one moment, vulnerable in the next. Strategic timing takes advantage of those rhythms. It doesn't overpower you. It waits until you're tired, distracted, or eager for relief, and then it nudges. The nudge feels small, but the consequences can be massive. The lesson is simple but hard to practice. When someone makes a request, pause and notice not just what they're asking, but when they're asking. Ask yourself, would my answer be the same if I weren't tired, distracted, or stressed? Timing is often the hidden lever in human behavior, and until you notice it, you may think you're making free choices, when in reality, you're simply reacting to the clock. False equivalence, there are lies that are obvious, the kind you can spot the moment they're spoken. And then there are lies that dress themselves as fairness, as logic, as balance. That is the trap of false equivalence. It works not by denying facts, but by twisting comparisons. It takes two things that are not equal, in weight, in meaning, in impact, and paints them as the same. Once you accept the frame, the battle is already lost. You argue within their rules, instead of seeing that the rules themselves are broken. Think of a child caught cheating on a test. When confronted, they snap back, but other kids cheat too. The defense doesn't erase what they did. It doesn't explain or justify. Instead, it creates an illusion of balance. If others do it, then it can't be so bad. The act of comparison itself dilutes the wrongdoing. Suddenly, the conversation is not about honesty or trust. It's about numbers. How many cheat? How often? In this way, guilt becomes blurred. This tactic thrives in arguments between partners. Imagine one partner caught lying about finances. Instead of admitting fault, they say, well, you lied to me once about where you were last year. On the surface, it looks like balance. Both lied, therefore both are guilty, but the scale is hidden. One lie may have been small and harmless. The other may involve money that could destroy stability. By lumping them together, accountability disappears. The victim is placed on trial alongside the wrongdoer. The comparison feels fair, but it erases the truth. False equivalence is a favorite weapon in politics. One leader is accused of corruption, of taking bribes or misusing power. Instead of addressing the charge, their defenders say, but don't all politicians do this? By broadening the comparison, the unique severity of the act is blurred into the background noise of everyone's guilty. The crime no long. Juror feels like crime. It feels like business as usual. That shift in perception is often enough to silence outrage. You see it in debates over violence as well. A group is accused of aggression, of harming innocents. Their defenders point to the other side, but they've done bad things too. The two acts are placed side by side, regardless of scale, context, or intent. By making them appear equal, responsibility is diffused. People stop asking who acted first, who escalated, who crossed moral lines. All that remains is the vague impression that both are guilty, and therefore neither needs to answer fully. False equivalence also appears in workplaces. A boss accused of mistreating employees might reply, Well, employees have been disrespectful to me, too. The comparison sounds balanced, two sides of one coin. But the power dynamics are ignored. A boss's mistreatment has greater weight because of their authority, because of the impact it carries on livelihoods and well-being. By flattening the roles, the seriousness is erased. Accountability dissolves into an illusion of symmetry. Even in everyday conversations, this tactic is common. Imagine criticizing a friend for forgetting your birthday. They respond, "Well, you forgot to call me last week when I was sick." The two situations are not equal. A birthday comes once a year, a major moment of acknowledgement. A phone call can happen any day. But by pulling them into one frame, the friend creates balance out of imbalance. Suddenly, the hurt becomes mutual, and the original responsibility fades. Why does this tactic work so well? Because humans crave fairness. Our brains are wired to look for balance, to believe that both sides of a conflict have weight. The phrase "both sides" feels logical, feels objective. And so, when someone presents false equivalence, it taps into that instinct. We stop questioning whether the thing is being compared truly belong on the same scale. We accept the frame because it sounds like reason, even when it is manipulation. Media thrives on this illusion. News anchors often present two opposing voices, one based on evidence, the other on conspiracy. By giving them equal airtime, they create the sense that both deserve equal consideration. The viewer is left with the impression that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, when in fact one side is grounded in fact and the other in fiction. But the balance of presentation becomes the balance of perception. False equivalence has reshaped reality. Advertisers use the same trick. A brand might say, "Our soda has no more sugar than the leading competitor." The comparison is meant to sound like reassurance, but it hides the truth. Both sodas may have dangerously high sugar levels. By placing them side by side, the company avoids scrutiny. They don't need to prove health, they only need to prove similarity. The illusion of equivalence replaces the demand for quality. False equivalence becomes especially dangerous when it enters moral arguments. Consider someone confronted with bigotry. Instead of admitting wrongdoing, they say, "Well, everyone makes offensive jokes sometimes." The act is pulled into the realm of normal, stripped of its particular harm. The person no longer feels the need to reflect or apologize. Why should they, if everyone is guilty? The tactic creates comfort where there should be discomfort. This trick is often used to silence victims. A survivor of abuse speaks out, and someone responds, "Relationships are complicated. Both sides make mistakes." The statement sounds wise, even balanced, but it erases the reality that one side may have inflicted serious harm while the other's mistakes were minor. By framing it as equal, the abuser is shielded, the victim is discredited. Balance becomes a weapon against truth. On a larger scale, false equivalence can stall progress. Activists call for justice, pointing to specific harms. OPP on its reply, "But don't your side also have flaws?" Instead of addressing the harm directly, the focus shifts to an endless cycle of comparison. No one acts because no one is seen as pure enough to lead change. By demanding false balance, the urgency of the original issue is drained. Even self-talk can trap us. You might tell yourself, "I procrastinated, but other people waste time too." Or, "I snapped at someone, but they snap at me too." Instead of facing responsibility and growing, you comfort yourself with false comparison. You place your mistakes next to others and blur the difference. Growth stalls because the mirror has been replaced with a scale that hides the weight. The genius of false equivalence is that it feels like truth. It dresses itself in the language of fairness. But fairness is not about flattening differences. It is about recognizing weight honestly. Not all lies are equal. Not all harms carry the same impact. Not all roles hold the same responsibility. To treat them as equal is not balance. It is blindness. To resist, you must notice when the frame itself is the trick. Ask, are these things truly the same? Do they carry the same scale of harm, the same weight of responsibility? Or is one side using false balance to escape accountability? The moment you see it, the illusion breaks. The scale is revealed for what it is: tilted, dishonest, and dangerous. False equivalence is not fairness. It is camouflage. It shields the guilty, confuses the innocent, and stalls truth. The sooner you learn to see it, the harder it becomes for others to trap you inside its false balance. Selective amnesia, memory is supposed to be the bridge between past and present, a record that helps us understand what happened so we can decide what to do next. But not all forgetting is innocent. Sometimes memory is sharpened like a blade, cutting away inconvenient pieces while leaving others intact. This tactic is called selective amnesia, the practice of remembering what benefits you while erasing what exposes you. It is not about losing memory, but about weaponizing it. Think of a partner who shouts hurtful words during an argument. Hours later, when confronted, they frown and say, "I never said that." To you, the memory is sharp, echoing in your chest. To them, it has vanished, or at least they act as if it has. Their selective amnesia isn't random. It protects their image. It makes you question yourself. Maybe you're exaggerating, maybe you imagined it. The tactic shifts the burden. Instead of them defending their behavior, you are left defending your memory. Parents sometimes use this strategy without realizing it. A child recalls being punished unfairly, humiliated in front of others. The parent, years later, laughs and says, "That never happened. You're too sensitive." To the child, the memory is carved deep. To the parent, it is brushed aside. Selective amnesia becomes a tool to preserve authority. If the parent doesn't remember, then the child's memory is automatically suspect. The child is forced to doubt themselves, even though the pain still lingers. In workplaces, selective amnesia often protects those in power. An employee recalls promises of promotion or pay raises. When the time comes, the manager shrugs. "I never said that." The words dissolve, leaving no evidence but memory. The employee is cornered. Without proof, their claim feels weak. The manager keeps authority, shielded by the convenient fog of forgetting. This tactic appears in politics, constantly. Leaders dismiss old statements, claiming never to have supported a policy, never to have made a controversial remark. Even when recordings exist, they act as if memory is flexible. The goal isn't to erase the past entirely, it's to create just enough doubt to confuse the present. If people argue over what was said, attention shifts away from accountability. Memory itself becomes a battlefield. Relationships are fertile ground for this manipulation. One partner repeatedly breaks agreements, but each time insists, "I never agreed to that." The other partner begins to doubt their own clarity. Did they mishear? Did they assume too much? Over time, the repeated denial wears them down. Selective amnesia isn't just about forgetting. It's about making the other person feel crazy for remembering. This is how it slides into gaslighting. Selective amnesia can also be collective. Families often erase certain painful histories. Perhaps a relative caused harm, but at gatherings, no one mentions it. If someone brings it up, they are told, "Why dig up the past? That never really happened the way you think." The family narrative is cleaned, polished, stripped of discomfort. The truth is buried, not because it vanished, but because it is too inconvenient to carry forward. Societies do the same. Entire nations engage in selective amnesia about their history. Atrocities are glossed over, rewritten, or denied outright. School books omit key events. Citizens are taught a version of history that preserves pride while erasing shame. The selective memory becomes identity, shaping generations who grow up believing half-truths. By forgetting selectively, the nation protects itself from guilt, but it also blinds itself to growth. On a personal level, selective amnesia can even serve self-protection. People sometimes forget their own wrongdoings because facing them would shatter their self-image. They remember all the times they were generous, patient, or kind, but forget the moments they were cruel, selfish, or neglectful. This isn't always conscious. The brain itself edits memories to protect the ego, but intentional or not, the result is the same. Responsibility disappears, leaving a sanitized version of the self. Why does this tactic work so effectively? Because memory itself is fragile. People assume it works like a camera, capturing and storing events faithfully. In truth, memory is fluid, reconstructed every time it is recalled. This flexibility allows manipulators to exploit the cracks. If someone insists strongly enough that something didn't happen, you may begin to doubt yourself. Over time, doubt erodes certainty. The manipulator doesn't need to erase the memory completely. They only need to make you unsure. In arguments, selective amnesia becomes a shield. When someone refuses to acknowledge past actions, you can't build accountability. Every discussion resets to zero, as if history doesn't exist. You can't point to patterns, because the patterns are denied. You're stuck in the present moment, fighting over what even counts as real. The manipulator, meanwhile, moves freely because the past no longer constrains them. Consider financial disputes. A roommate promises to pay back money. Weeks later, they claim, "I never said I'd pay you back so soon." Then later still, "I never borrowed that much." Each denial chips away at the shared record. Without written proof, you're left vulnerable. Selective amnesia protects the borrower, leaving you carrying both memory and loss. Even institutions rely on this tactic. Companies accused of wrongdoing often claim, "That policy never existed," or "We don't recall those practices." Records vanish, documents are destroyed, and suddenly the past dissolves. The company isn't innocent, but without memory, they can't be pinned down. Selective amnesia buys survival. The emotional toll of this tactic is immense. When someone denies your memory, you begin to mistrust yourself. You replay moments over and over, trying to prove them real in your mind. But the more you explain, the more resistance you face. Eventually, you may silence yourself. You may decide it's easier not to remember, easier to let their version stand. This is the true victory of selective amnesia. Not just rewriting their past, but rewriting yours. Even in friendships, this can play out subtly. A friend constantly cancels plans. When confronted, they insist, "I've only canceled once." You recall 3, 4, 5 times, but they brush it off. Maybe you're exaggerating. Maybe you're being too sensitive. Doubt creeps in, and with it, the erosion of your own trust in your perception. The friendship continues, but now built on shaky ground. The most dangerous form of selective amnesia is when people apply it to themselves in toxic relationships. They remember the few good days vividly, replaying them like proof of love. The bad days, the shouting, the neglect, the betrayal, are conveniently blurred or downplayed. It wasn't that bad. Everyone fights. This self-imposed forgetting keeps them trapped. By editing their own memories, they give the abuser room to continue. Selective amnesia doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it takes the form of a shrug, a laugh, a casual, "I don't remember that," but the effect is powerful. It disarms you, isolates you, and makes you carry the weight of memory alone. Over time, you may find yourself agreeing to a rewritten past, just to keep the peace. The defense against it is twofold: documentation and trust in your own perception. Write things down, keep records. When someone denies the past, evidence can protect you. But even more importantly, learn to trust your memory. No one else lives inside your mind. If you recall pain, if you recall betrayal, don't let someone's selective amnesia erase it. Memory may be imperfect, but it is still yours. Selective amnesia is not simply forgetting. It is control through forgetting. It reshapes relationships, families, workplaces, even nations. The truth is always heavier than lies, and so people try to lighten the load by cutting parts of it away. But the weight doesn't disappear. It falls on someone else, often the one who remembers. Social proof hijacking. Human beings are social creatures. For thousands of years, survival depended not only on our individual choices, but on the collective wisdom of the tribe. If everyone ran from danger, you ran too. If everyone gathered food in a certain place, you followed. Social proof, the instinct to look at what others are doing as a guide, is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. But what happens when this natural instinct is twisted, bent, and exploited? That is the tactic of social proof hijacking. It is the deliberate manipulation of our need to conform by manufacturing the appearance of consensus, even when none exists. Picture a new restaurant that just opened in town. You walk by and see a line stretching down the block. Instantly, you assume the food must be good. You don't know a single person in the line. You don't know if they've even eaten there before, but the sight alone is enough to convince you. Maybe you weren't hungry. Maybe you had other plans. But the line whispers, "Everyone else thinks this is worth it. Don't miss out." Later, you discover that the line was staged. Friends of the owner, hired actors, or just people paid with free food to stand there. The quality of the restaurant never mattered. The illusion of social proof made the decision for you. Marketers do this constantly. A product might boast, best-selling in its category. But what category? Who verified this? Or you see reviews online, hundreds of glowing 5-star ratings. Only later do you learn that many of them were fake, purchased from bots or outsourced writers. The company doesn't need real approval. It only needs the illusion of approval. And because humans are wired to believe the crowd, even a fabricated crowd has power. Social proof hijacking thrives in workplaces too. Imagine a manager proposing a controversial new policy. In the meeting, they begin by saying, "Everyone I've spoken to already supports this." Even if you disagree, you suddenly feel like the odd one out. Maybe you stay silent. Maybe you even nod along to avoid looking difficult. But the truth is, the everyone the manager referred to might just be two people. The claim creates a phantom majority that pressures you into silence. This tactic is devastating in relationships. A manipulative partner might say, "All my friends think you overreact too much," or "Everyone agrees you're the difficult one. You haven't spoken to these friends. You don't know what they think." But the statement alone plants doubt. You imagine a group of people whispering about you, judging you, siding with your partner. To avoid isolation, you back down. The crowd may be imaginary, but your fear of its judgment is real. Politics is one of the largest arenas for social proof hijacking. Leaders often exaggerate public support. They claim that the people are behind them, even when polls say otherwise. They stage rallies with carefully selected audiences, film from angles that make small crowds look massive, and repeat slogans that sound like consensus. The message isn't, "Here's why I'm right." The message is, "Everyone already agrees with me." Once that illusion takes hold, individuals are less likely to resist. Nobody wants to be the lone dissenter against what seems like the will of the majority. Social proof hijacking thrives online more than anywhere else. Social media platforms amplify it through likes, shares, and followers. An influencer with millions of followers feels more trustworthy, more authoritative, even if half those followers are bots. A video with thousands of likes seems valuable before you even press play. And the cruel truth is this: most people don't look beyond the numbers. They assume the crowd must know something they don't. The hijacking of social proof has become an industry, buying followers, manipulating algorithms, fabricating popularity. The appearance of approval has become more powerful than the substance of it. Even in cults and extremist groups, social proof hijacking is central. Members are told that everyone else believes, that only outsiders doubt. When new recruits look around, they see people nodding, chanting, agreeing. What they don't see is that many of those people are acting out of fear, or because they too believe everyone else is committed. The illusion is self-sustaining. Each person hides their doubt, thinking they're the only one, which convinces others that belief is unanimous. The group doesn't need to control thoughts directly. It only needs to control appearances. Why does this work so powerfully? Because belonging is survival. Our brains are wired to avoid rejection at almost any cost. When we sense we're out of sync with the group, alarm bells go off inside us. To be isolated feels dangerous, even when there is no real danger. Social proof hijacking exploits this primal wiring. It replaces truth with appearance. It doesn't matter if the crowd is fake, small, or manipulated. The fear of being alone makes it feel real. Think about advertising again. A clothing brand pays a celebrity to wear their product. Suddenly, millions want to buy it, not because they like the fabric or design, but because they don't want to be left behind. The celebrity becomes the stand-in for the crowd, a shortcut to influence. Or think of those late-night commercials. 4 out of 5 doctors recommend this toothpaste. Maybe it's true, maybe it's carefully twisted language. Either way, the statistic hijacks social proof. If the crowd of authority, approves, then you should too. The tactic becomes even more subtle when it weaponizes fear of exclusion. A teenager doesn't want to try a dangerous challenge. Their friends say, "Everyone else is doing it." Even if that's a lie, the statement works. The teen imagines being the only one left out, the one mocked for not fitting in. Social proof hijacking doesn't need evidence. It only needs your imagination to do the rest. Workshops, seminars, and scams often use applause and testimonials as stage signals. A speaker might pay a few participants to stand up and declare how life-changing the program is. The rest of the audience, unsure of their own feelings, assumes the enthusiasm must be genuine. They clap louder, nod harder, and even sign up, pulled in by the false proof of the staged crowd. The dark genius of social proof hijacking is that it multiplies itself. Once a few people believe the illusion, their genuine approval becomes part of the signal. Others see their belief and follow. The fake crowd births a real one. Manipulators don't need to trick everyone. They only need to trick enough to start the chain reaction. To defend yourself, you must learn to pause when the crowd seems overwhelming. Ask, who is this crowd? Is the support real or staged? What evidence do I have beyond appearance? Remember that numbers can be bought, testimonials can be fabricated, applause can be rehearsed. Social proof isn't always proof of truth. Sometimes it's proof of manipulation. Social proof hijacking thrives because it taps into one of the deepest fears of the human psyche, the fear of standing alone. To resist, you must grow comfortable in that place. To trust your judgment even when it doesn't match the crowd. Because often the crowd isn't real. And even when it is, being right has never depended on being popular. Conditional vulnerability. Vulnerability, at its core, is one of the most powerful tools of human connection. When someone opens up about their struggles, their fears, their insecurities, it creates intimacy. It builds trust. You lean closer because you feel seen, because their openness makes you believe you are safe to open up in return. Vulnerability, when genuine, is the soil where relationships grow, but when it is staged, calculated, and selectively deployed, it becomes a weapon. This is the tactic of conditional vulnerability, revealing weakness not for connection, but for control. Imagine someone who rarely apologizes, who never admits fault, but at the exact moment you confront them with undeniable evidence, they suddenly crack. Tears flow. They confess to a childhood wound, a painful memory, a hidden struggle. You freeze. Your anger softens. Instead of holding them accountable, you find yourself comforting them. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. Their vulnerability wasn't spontaneous. It was conditional, released only to shield themselves for consequences. This tactic is especially common in relationships. Picture a partner who constantly neglects responsibilities. When confronted, they don't deny it outright. Instead, they share a deeply personal story. Stress at work, an unresolved trauma, an old family wound. You feel guilty for being upset. You back off. The cycle repeats. Every time accountability approaches, they open the same wound. Over time, their vulnerability becomes a shield, a way to redirect your energy from demanding responsibility to offering sympathy. Conditional vulnerability also thrives in workplaces. A boss criticized for poor management might respond not with solutions, but with an emotional confession. I'm under so much pressure. You have no idea how hard this is for me. The employees, already hesitant to criticize, back down completely. Their frustration turns into guilt. The boss has avoided accountability not by denying the truth, but by hijacking compassion. Vulnerability becomes a calculated tool to disarm dissent. This tactic is especially cruel because it blurs the line between real and fake. Sometimes the pain shared is genuine, the story is real, but the timing and selectivity of its release reveal its purpose. Conditional vulnerability isn't about honesty, it's about leverage. The vulnerable moment only appears when it benefits the person most, and disappears when connection would actually require it. Think of a friend who constantly simulates conversations with their struggles, but vanishes the moment you need support. They reveal their hardships to pull you in, but never reciprocate. Their vulnerability is a one-way street. You give, they take. The relationship feels intimate at first, but soon you realize the openness was never mutual. It was a performance designed to keep attention and care flowing toward them. Even public figures use this tactic. A celebrity caught in scandal may suddenly release a tearful interview, confessing to stress, addiction, or family struggles. The confession shifts the narrative. Critics hesitate to press further. Fans rush to defend them. The focus moves from their actions to their pain. Vulnerability here doesn't humanize. It manipulates. It reframes the story in a way that protects them from full accountability. Conditional vulnerability is also common in cults and extremist groups. Leaders may stage moments of openness, confessing their struggles to appear human, relatable, trustworthy. Followers lean in, believing they've glimpsed the leader's true self. But these moments are carefully chosen, scripted to deepen loyalty. When power is at stake, The leader never admits weakness. The vulnerability is rationed, conditional, weaponized. Why does this tactic work so effectively? Because compassion is one of humanity's deepest instincts. When someone shows pain, we want to soothe it. Anger dissolves, defenses lower. Manipulators know this. They don't need to win the argument if they can change its terms. Instead of discussing their behavior, the focus shifts to their wounds. The victim becomes caretaker, and accountability evaporates. The trap is even more dangerous when conditional vulnerability mirrors your own wounds. If someone opens up about a pain similar to yours, it creates an instant bond. You feel like they understand you, like you're not alone. But if that vulnerability only appears when they need to avoid criticism, then the bond was built on exploitation, not truth. Your deepest empathy was hijacked. Parents sometimes weaponize this tactic. A child points out unfair treatment. Instead of acknowledging it, the parent sighs and says, "You don't know how hard my life has been. You don't know what I've sacrificed." The child falls silent, guilt replacing their frustration. The parent's vulnerability is real, but its timing transforms it into a shield. The original issue is buried under the weight of sympathy. Conditional vulnerability often hides beneath charm. Imagine someone on a first date who quickly shares intimate struggles, creating the illusion of closeness. You feel special, chosen, trusted, but later you learn they repeat the same stories with everyone. The vulnerability wasn't tailored to you, it was bait, a way to fast-track intimacy. What felt authentic was actually strategy. This tactic thrives online too. Influencers craft posts about their struggles, about raw moments, complete with carefully staged photos. The performance draws in followers, creating an illusion of authenticity, but the timing is telling. The vulnerability always coincides with brand deals, controversies, or drops in engagement. Pain becomes content, weakness becomes marketing. It isn't openness, it's currency. The cruelest aspect of conditional vulnerability is that it poisons real connection. Once you've been burned by it, you begin to doubt all vulnerability, even genuine moments. When someone cries, you wonder, are they hurting or are they protecting themselves from me? When someone confesses, you question whether it's honesty or performance. Trust erodes. Manipulated compassion leaves scars long after the manipulator is gone. But not all vulnerability is conditional. The difference lies in reciprocity and timing. Genuine vulnerability appears even when it doesn't serve self-interest. It shows up when building intimacy, when fostering understanding, not only when accountability looms. Real openness invites mutual exchange, not one-sided sympathy. Conditional vulnerability, on the other hand, is like a weapon that only appears when cornered. To protect yourself, you must learn to notice patterns. Does someone only open up when they're under pressure, when they're being criticized, when they're about to lose power? Do they disappear when you need the same honesty in return? Do they use their pain to avoid accountability rather than deepen connection? These are the red flags. Compassion is never the enemy. It's one of humanity's greatest strengths. But compassion without awareness can be hijacked. Conditional vulnerability thrives when people believe that all openness is genuine. By learning to separate performance from truth, you preserve both your heart and your boundaries. Conditional vulnerability isn't about sharing wounds. It's about weaponizing them. It hides behind tears, behind confessions, behind intimate stories, but its goal is always the same: control. And the greatest tragedy is that it makes real vulnerability harder to trust, poisoning the very soil where human connection should grow. Paradoxical framing. Sometimes the most powerful way to trap someone is not to block their choices, but to twist the meaning of those choices until no matter what they do, they lose. This is the art of paradoxical framing, shaping a situation so that every path leads back to the manipulator's advantage. Unlike outright lies or threats, paradoxical framing hides inside language. It forces you into double binds, contradictions, and impossible standards. You aren't told you can't win, but every option is carefully framed so that winning is impossible. Think of a child confronting their parent about unfair rules. The parent responds, "If you obey me, it proves you respect me. If you disobey me, it proves you don't love me." Notice the trap. Obedience means loyalty. Disobedience means betrayal. There is no space for disagreement, no way to express independence without being labeled unloving. The child's choice isn't really a choice at all. The frame has been set. This same trick appears in toxic relationships. A partner might say, "If you really trusted me, you wouldn't ask questions. And if you don't trust me, it means you're the problem." In one sentence, both paths are poisoned. If you ask questions, you're controlling. If you stay silent, you're complicit. The paradox ensures that no matter what, the partner avoids accountability while shifting blame back onto you. In workplaces, paradoxical framing is often used to suppress criticism. An employee raises a concern, and the boss replies, "If you cared about this company, you wouldn't complain. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be here at all." The employee is stuck. To raise issues means they lack loyalty, but to stay silent means accepting harm. Either way, the power structure remains unchallenged. The paradox cages them inside silence disguised as choice. Religious and ideological groups weaponize this tactic frequently. Followers are told, "If you believe, it proves your faith. If you doubt, it proves your weakness, which is why you must believe harder." Doubt is not treated as a natural part of growth, but as evidence of sin. The paradox ensures that even questioning the group strengthens the group's control. Every path bends back to obedience. Political propaganda thrives on paradoxical framing too. Leaders may say, "If you support us, you're a patriot. If you criticize us, you're helping the enemy." Notice how criticism isn't framed as civic duty, as engagement, as concern. It is reframed as treason. Citizens are forced into a bind. Silence and obedience equal loyalty, while dissent equals betrayal. The paradox leaves no middle ground. Even in everyday arguments, you can see this trick. A friend accuses you, "If you were a real friend, you would always be there for me." The paradox lies in the word always. No human can always be available. To meet the standard is impossible, and to fail, it is proof that you're not a real friend. The demand is designed not for fairness, but for endless leverage. The genius of paradoxical framing is that it forces you to argue inside someone else's logic. Once you accept their terms, you're already trapped. For example, a manipulator might say, "If you defend yourself, it means you're guilty because guilty people get defensive. If you stay quiet, it means you're guilty because you have no defense." Both silence and speech are interpreted as proof of guilt. You scramble to explain yourself, but the frame itself ensures you cannot win. Think about relationships where affection is weaponized. A partner says, "If you love me, you'll change everything about yourself for me. If you won't change, then you don't love me." Here, love is reframed as proof of total surrender. No matter what you do, the paradox holds. Either lose yourself or be branded unsons. Loving. It is not love being tested, it is control being enforced. This tactic also thrives in parenting. A parent might tell their child, "If you're independent, you don't need me anymore," which means you're ungrateful. But if you rely on me, it means you're weak and a disappointment. The child is caught between two impossible standards. No matter what they choose, they fail. Paradoxical framing here becomes a lifelong chain, shaping self-worth around contradictions that cannot be resolved. Why does this work so powerfully? Because humans crave coherence. We want our actions to make sense, to align with values. When someone presents a paradox, it throws us into confusion. Our brains don't want to hold contradictions, so we try desperately to resolve them. But if the paradox is designed to trap us, our attempts to resolve it only tighten the cage. We bend, compromise, and self-blame, because we assume the problem must be us, not the frame itself. Sales and marketing use paradoxical framing as well. Think of slogans like, "If you don't buy this, you don't care about your family's safety." Now refusing the product isn't a neutral choice. It is framed as neglect. You're trapped between two unfair options: spend money or accept the label of bad parent, bad spouse, bad protector. The paradox isn't logical, but it's emotionally powerful. It exploits fear and love in the same breath. Social groups use this trick to enforce conformity. If you leave, it proves you were never loyal. If you stay, you must accept everything without question. Here, departure is reframed as evidence of disloyalty, and staying becomes submission. The paradox protects the group from scrutiny because even leaving is twisted into validation of the group's narrative. Paradoxical framing also appears in apologies, or rather, the avoidance of them. Someone might say, "If you can't forgive me, it means you're cruel. If you do forgive me, it means you admit it wasn't. It's a big deal. The trap poisons forgiveness itself. Refusal means you're heartless. Acceptance means your pain is minimized. Either way, your position is weakened. The darker side of paradoxical framing is that it erodes identity. When someone is constantly caught in contradictions, damned if they do, damned if they don't, they begin to lose confidence in their own judgment. They stop making choices freely and instead focus on avoiding blame. The paradox becomes the silent background of their life, shaping every decision. The trick thrives because it masquerades as logic. On the surface, it sounds reasonable. If you cared, you'd do this. If you don't do this, you clearly don't care. But when you step back, you see the lie. Caring doesn't equal blind compliance, and disagreement doesn't equal betrayal. The paradox works only if you accept its frame. The defense is awareness. The moment you feel trapped in a double bind, pause. Ask, who created this frame? Who benefits if every choice makes me look guilty, weak, or unloving? Often the answer is simple. The paradox is not truth, it is strategy. Breaking free means refusing the frame altogether. You don't have to prove yourself inside their logic. You can reject the logic itself. Paradoxical framing doesn't just twist words, it twists reality. It creates prisons made of contradictions, where every path leads back to control. The key is to see the bars. Once you recognize that the paradox is designed, not natural, you reclaim your freedom. Because in truth, not every choice is a trap, only the ones framed that way. Misdirection. Praise. Praise is one of the most powerful forces in human life. From childhood, we learn to crave approval. A smile from a parent, a compliment from a teacher, applause from a crowd. All of these tell us we are good, worthy, accepted. But like every powerful tool, praise can be twisted. It can become less about encouragement and more about control. This is the tactic of misdirection praise. When compliments are not given to uplift you, but to subtly steer you, to manipulate your choices, to make you obey without realizing it. At its core, misdirection praise works by rewarding not what you truly are, but what someone else wants you to be. The praise feels warm, flattering, even addictive, but its direction is wrong. Instead of celebrating your authenticity, it celebrates your compliance. And because humans are wired to lean toward what feels rewarding, the praise quietly pushes you off your own path and onto theirs. Imagine a student in class. They write a creative essay, bold and unconventional. The teacher doesn't praise the creativity, but instead says, "I like how neat your handwriting is." The student wanted recognition for their ideas, but instead they are rewarded for something superficial. Slowly they learn that boldness isn't what gets approval, conformity is. Over time, the praise shapes their choices, steering them away from authenticity and toward obedience. In relationships, misdirection praise can be devastating. Picture a partner who constantly says things like, "I love it when you stay quiet and let me talk," or "You're so great when you don't complain." On the surface, these are compliments, but look deeper. The praise isn't about who you are, it's about how well you erase yourself. Over time, you learn to shrink, to silence, to disappear, all because the praise feels safer than the criticism. Workplaces use this tactic with precision. A boss may praise an employee not for their innovation, but for staying late without asking questions. The compliment seems generous, but it reinforces overwork and silence, not growth or creativity. Employees start chasing praise, sacrificing their boundaries, because the praise feels like proof of value. In reality, they're being trained to neglect themselves for the company's benefit. This tactic often hides inside comparisons. A parent might say to one child, "You're so much easier to handle than your brother." On the surface, it's praise, but underneath, it pits siblings against each other and rewards compliance over individuality. The praised child learns, "My worth comes from being less trouble, not from who I truly am." The other child learns, "My uniqueness is a flaw." Both are trapped by misdirected praise. Friends can use it too. A friend might say, "You're the only one who never argues with me." It sounds flattering, but it rewards silence instead of honesty. You begin to fear conflict, thinking that disagreement will cost you the friendship. Slowly, you give up your voice, not because you were silenced outright, but because you were praised for keeping it quiet. Advertisers and marketers rely on this tactic constantly. Consider slogans like, "Smart moms choose this brand," or "Only the strongest men drive this car." The praise is built into the product, but it's misdirected. Instead of celebrating individuality, it pressures you into buying to earn the compliment. If you don't buy, what does that make you? Not smart, not strong. The praise pushes your behavior while pretending to empower you. Politicians do it as well. A leader might say, "Real patriots never question their government." The statement is framed as praise, celebrating loyalty. But in reality, it silences dissent. Citizens who crave the title of patriot learn to stay quiet, to obey, to nivis, or question. The praise feels like honor, but its purpose is to narrow acceptable behavior. Misdirection praise is particularly effective because it never feels hostile. Unlike insults or criticism, which trigger defense, praise lowers your guard. You lean in, hungry for more. The manipulator doesn't need to force you. They simply guide you with a steady stream of compliments aimed at the behaviors that benefit them most. Over time, you begin to mold yourself around the praise, losing sight of who you are without it. This tactic thrives in childhood. Imagine a girl who loves running outside, climbing trees, playing rough, but her relatives only ever say, "You look so beautiful when you wear dresses and sit still." Slowly, she learns that approval doesn't come when she runs or climbs. It comes when she behaves in a way that fits their script. The praise misdirects her sense of self, teaching her to trade authenticity for acceptance. Religious groups sometimes weaponize this too. Members are praised as faithful, not for their compassion or kindness, but for their unquestioning obedience. The compliments sound holy, but they reinforce compliance instead of true growth. Doubters are excluded from the praise, which pressures them to suppress questions. The community appears united, but beneath it, individuality has been quietly erased by misdirected approval. Why does misdirection praise cut so deeply? Because it twists something sacred. Praise is supposed to nurture, to affirm what is best in you, to help you grow into your potential. But when it is misdirected, it creates confusion. You begin to crave the praise so much that you betray yourself to earn it. Your identity becomes shaped not by who you are, but by who others want you to be. Sometimes the tactic is subtle. A boss tells an employee, "I can always count on you not to rock the boat." A partner says, "I love how you never need attention." A teacher praises, "You're so quiet, you never cause trouble." Context collapse. Human communication depends on context. Words don't exist in isolation. Their meaning shifts depending on tone, timing, history, and audience. What you say to a close friend at midnight carries a different weight than the same words spoken to a stranger in daylight. Context is the frame that makes meaning possible. But when that frame is stripped away, when words or actions are torn from their original setting and presented naked, distorted, or universalized, something dangerous happens. This is the phenomenon of context collapse, when complexity is erased, leaving only fragments that can be twisted to serve any agenda. Imagine a joke whispered between two friends, layered with years of shared history. In that space, the joke is safe, understood, harmless. But taken out of that moment and repeated to others, online, at work, or among strangers, the same words can sound cruel, offensive, even threatening. The context that softened and shaped the meaning is gone. What remains is a flattened version, vulnerable to attack. This is the essence of context collapse. What was once nuanced becomes weaponized through isolation. Social media is the perfect engine for this. A tweet, a video clip, a quote pulled from a long interview, all stripped from their larger frame and presented as standalone truth. A single sentence may go viral, inflaming outrage, while the paragraphs around it vanish. People react not to the full reality, but to a fragment, distorted by its lack of context. Suddenly, reputations are destroyed, movements discredited, friendships fractured. Not because of what was truly said or meant, but because the frame was collapsed. Context collapse doesn't just affect individuals, it reshapes entire narratives. Think of political debates. A candidate speaks for an hour, laying out arguments and details, but the news headlines focus on a single L. Media thrives on collapsed context. Outrage sells. Nuance does not. A 30-second clip of anger, conflict, or shock is more shareable than a balanced explanation. Audiences rarely seek the full story, they react to fragments. This allows anyone who controls the frame, editors, influencers, political operatives, to reshape truth by collapsing it into pieces that serve their purpose. Cults and extremist groups weaponize this tactic relentlessly. They take complex scriptures, philosophies, or historical events and reduce them to a handful of slogans. Entire traditions are flattened into sound bites that erase nuance, leaving members with no room for independent interpretation. A single verse, ripped from context, becomes a law. A single quote, repeated endlessly, becomes a doctrine. The collapse of context creates the illusion of clarity, while hiding the truth that life is always messier, always more complicated. Context collapse also poisons memory. When we look back on our own lives, we often isolate certain events without their full surroundings. A moment of failure becomes the whole story of who we are, detached from the successes before and after. A single betrayal defines a relationship, erasing years of kindness. This self-inflicted context collapse keeps us trapped, unable to see the bigger picture of our lives. The cruelest part of this phenomenon is that once context is collapsed, it's hard to restore. People rarely revisit the full story. They cling to the fragment that confirmed their bias, that satisfied their craving for simplicity. The truth becomes irrelevant once the collapsed version has gone viral, once it has etched itself into memory. Consider how this shapes justice. A person accused of wrongdoing may have their entire life summarized in one sentence. They were caught doing X. The years of complexity, the context of pressure, the circumstances. Token generosity. Generosity, in its purest form, is one of the most beautiful aspects of being human. To give freely, without strings attached, is an act that builds trust, strengthens relationships, and spreads warmth. But, like all things sacred, generosity can be corrupted. It can be stripped of its sincerity and transformed into a tool for leverage. This is the tactic of token generosity, giving not out of kindness, but as a calculated move to establish control, to silence criticism, or to buy loyalty. Token generosity looks harmless on the surface. It may even look admirable, a small gift, a favor, a gesture of kindness. But its power lies not in what is given, but in what is expected afterward. The gift becomes a hook, a debt, a silent contract. The receiver, often unaware at first, finds themselves bound, unable to criticize, unable to resist, unable to leave, because, after all they've done for me. Imagine a boss who underpays and overworks their staff. Morale is low, complaints are rising. Then, one Friday, the boss surprises everyone with free pizza. Smiles appear, the tension softens, gratitude flows. For a brief moment, the employees feel seen. But by Monday, nothing has changed. The pay is the same, the workload heavier than ever. The pizza wasn't a solution. It was a token. A calculated act of generosity designed to pacify, to distract, to make the workers hesitate before speaking out. After all, how can you complain about injustice when the boss cares enough to buy you lunch? Families use token generosity too. Picture a parent who is emotionally absent, dismissive, or critical most of the time. But once in a while, they bring home a gift or spend money on something flashy. The child, desperate for love, clings to that gesture as proof that their parent cares. Over time, the gifts become a substitute for real affection, a token of love that silence is the deeper hunger for connection. When the child grows older and dares to question, they are reminded of those tokens. Don't say I never did anything for you. The gift becomes a shield against accountability. Romantic partners also weaponize this tactic. A neglectful or abusive partner may occasionally shower their significant other with flowers, gifts, or dramatic gestures of affection. These tokens are not consistent acts of love. They are strategically timed resets. Just when the partner begins to question leaving, the token arrives, making them second guess. Maybe they do care. Maybe I was overreacting. The cycle continues, harm followed by token generosity, which creates confusion and delays escape. Politics runs on this tactic. A government facing criticism for corruption or neglect announces a small relief package, a temporary bonus, or a symbolic reform. Citizens feel grateful, even loyal, despite the larger problems remaining untouched. The token generosity becomes a distraction, a way to pacify dissent without changing the deeper structures of power. A small act is magnified, while systemic issues are ignored. In workplaces, managers often use token generosity as currency. A small perk, coffee vouchers, free t-shirts, or casual Fridays, is presented as proof of a caring culture. Meanwhile, salaries stagnate, benefits shrink, workloads grow. Employees who complain are reminded of the perks. You're lucky to work somewhere that does so much for its staff. The tokens act as smokescreens, hiding the real imbalance of power. This tactic thrives on gratitude. Human beings are wired to reciprocate generosity. If someone does something kind, we feel an internal pressure to return the favor, even if the gesture was small. Manipulators know this. They don't need to give much, only enough to trigger that instinct. Once the hook is set, the receiver feels defeated, silenced by the weight of owing. Think of a friend who constantly asks for favors but rarely gives back. On the rare occasion they do something for you, they highlight it endlessly. Remember when I helped you move that one time? That token becomes a weapon. No matter how many times they've leaned on you, the single act of generosity is used to erase the imbalance. The gift was never about kindness. It was about establishing leverage. Charities and corporations also weaponize token generosity. A company donates a small fraction of its wealth to charity and publicizes it as proof of its goodness. The act distracts from the harm the company continues to cause. Citizens applaud the generosity, unaware that the token is a fraction of what was taken. The generosity is not real. It is branding, reputation management, a calculated investment. Why does token generosity cut so deeply? Because it poisons the idea of kindness itself. Genuine giving should create freedom, the freedom to feel loved, supported, seen, but token generosity creates chains. The receiver feels guilty for wanting more, for pointing out what is missing. They silence themselves, convinced they are ungrateful if they ask for real change. This tactic is especially destructive in abusive relationships. The cycle of harm followed by token generosity creates emotional whiplash. Victims cling to the rare good moments, convincing themselves that the tokens outweigh the pain. They stay trapped, waiting for the next small gesture, mistaking scraps for love. The tokens keep hope alive, even when reality is bleak. Token generosity also appears in parenting when material gifts replace apologies. A parent who refuses to admit fault might instead buy a child something new. The child, eager for acknowledgement, accepts the gift as a substitute for the words they needed to hear. Over time, they learn that love is not expressed through accountability, but through tokens. This shapes their view of relationships for life. Even in friendships, tokens can be deceptive. A friend who is unreliable may occasionally do something grand. Throw a party, buy a round of drinks, give a flashy gift. These tokens keep the friendship alive, distracting from the lack of consistency, empathy, or reliability. The relationship survives on illusions because the tokens mask the absence of real support. The genius of token generosity is that it doesn't require much effort. A small gesture, strategically timed, can silence massive criticism. The act doesn't have to be genuine, it only has to be visible. And in a world hungry for signs of care, even a token can feel like proof. To defend against this, you must ask, what comes after the gift? Does the generosity continue, or is it isolated? Does it build trust, or is it used to shut me down? Real generosity expands your freedom. Token generosity restricts it. Real generosity makes you feel valued. Token generosity makes you feel indebted. The difference is in the pattern. Token generosity is not kindness, it is performance. It is manipulation dressed as giving. It leaves you grateful for scraps while the real issues remain untouched. And the more you accept the tokens as proof, the longer you remain in a system where true generosity, the kind that heals, the kind that uplifts, is forever denied. Presupposition insertion. Words are rarely neutral. Every sentence we hear carries not just what is said, but also what is assumed. And often the assumptions are far more powerful than the words themselves. This is the subtle art of presupposition insertion, slipping hidden assumptions into language so that they are accepted as truth without ever being questioned. Instead of arguing openly, the manipulator builds their desired conclusion into the foundation of the conversation, forcing you to agree to their frame before you even realize what's happening. Consider a parent saying to their child, "When you clean your room, do you want to start with the floor or the shelves?" On the surface, this sounds like a question, maybe even empowering, but hidden inside is the presupposition that the room will be cleaned. That choice is not up for debate. The child thinks they're deciding freely, but in reality, the decision was already made. This is presupposition insertion at its simplest, presenting a statement that smuggles assumptions into the background so smoothly that they go unchallenged. In relationships, the tactic takes on sharper edges. A partner might say, "Why are you always so defensive when I try to help you?" The presupposition here is that they were being helpful, that their words were constructive, not critical. The real issue, whether their help was controlling or condescending, is buried. The frame shifts. Now the focus is not on their behavior, but on your supposed defensiveness. By accepting the question, you have already conceded the underlying assumption. Workplaces are filled with this tactic. A boss might ask, "Since you're the most reliable person on the team, can you stay late tonight?" The presupposition is that you are already reliable, and to refuse would threaten that identity. To decline feels like rejecting not the request, but the compliment. Embedded within it. The employee feels cornered, manipulated not by force, but by assumption. Politics thrives on presupposition insertion. A leader might ask, "How do we stop outsiders from taking our jobs?" The presupposition is that outsiders are taking jobs, that the problem is real, that the cause is clear. The debate shifts away from questioning the assumption itself and moves directly into solutions. The manipulator doesn't have to prove the claim, they only have to presuppose it. The public, swept along, argues about how rather than whether. Even advertising uses this trick. A slogan like, "The smarter choice is brand X," presupposes that choosing brand X is inherently linked with intelligence. No one stops to ask whether buying laundry detergent actually proves intelligence. The presupposition has already fused the two concepts together. You don't just buy soap anymore, you buy identity. Presupposition insertion is so effective because it bypasses the conscious mind. Our brains process language quickly, often focusing on the explicit content of a sentence while letting assumptions slip past unnoticed. By the time we engage with the words, the presuppositions have already sunk in. Like background music in a film, they shape the emotional atmosphere without drawing attention to themselves. Religious groups often rely on this tactic to shape thought. A preacher might ask, "How can we remain faithful despite all the temptations of the outside world?" The presupposition is that the outside world is dangerous, corrupt, and full of temptation. No evidence is offered, no debate is invited. The assumption is baked into the language, and the congregation is guided to focus on endurance rather than questioning the frame. In friendships, presupposition insertion can feel subtle but corrosive. A friend might say, "Why do you always misunderstand me?" The presupposition is that misunderstanding is your fault, that they have communicated perfectly. The possibility that they are unclear or evasive or inconsistent vanishes. By even answering the question, you accept the assumption that you are the problem. The power of presupposition insertion lies in its invisibility. Unlike outright lies, which can be challenged, presuppositions don't announce themselves. They hide inside grammar, tone, and phrasing. Questions like, "Why don't you care about me?" presuppose lack of care. Statements like, "Even you should understand this," presuppose your incompetence. Every interaction becomes a quiet battlefield of hidden assumptions. Parents sometimes use it unconsciously when disciplining children. Instead of asking, "Did you take the cookie?" they ask, "Why did you take the cookie?" The difference seems small, but the second question presupposes guilt. The child is pushed into defending themselves against an assumption that has already judged them. The frame leaves no room for innocence. Romantic manipulation can grow insidious through this tactic. A partner might sigh and say, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't need so much space." The presupposition is that asking for space equals lack of love. The question of whether love can coexist with individuality is erased. The manipulator doesn't have to forbid independence directly. They only have to embed the assumption that independence contradicts love. In courtrooms, lawyers master this art. A lawyer might ask a witness, "How fast was the car going when it ran the red light?" The presupposition is that the car did run the red light. The witness, caught in the frame, may answer without challenging the hidden assumption, thereby reinforcing the narrative. Judges and juries may unconsciously absorb the presupposition as fact. Presupposition insertion also infects media interviews. A journalist might ask, what mistakes will your opponent repeat if elected? The presupposition is that mistakes will happen, that the opponent is prone to failure. Even a denial still affirms the frame by engaging with it. The trap is subtle but effective. Every response strengthens the assumption. Why does this tactic work so well? Because challenging a presupposition feels unnatural. If someone asks you, why are you so lazy? The instinct is to defend yourself, not to stop and say, wait, who said I'm lazy in the first place? By engaging, you validate. By answering, you concede. To resist, you must learn the rare skill of stepping outside the frame altogether. Presupposition insertion is dangerous because it makes you fight battles on someone else's terms. You're not debating the truth. You're debating inside assumptions that have already tilted the ground. It's like entering a game where the rules are rigged against you before you even start playing. The defense is awareness and reframing. When faced with a loaded question or hidden assumption, pause. Identify the presupposition. Ask yourself, what is being smuggled into this statement? What am I being asked to accept without proof? Then, if necessary, reject the frame entirely. If someone says, why don't you care? Respond with, I do care. The real question is, why do you assume otherwise? Breaking the frame returns control to you. Presupposition insertion may seem small, even harmless, but its impact is profound. Over time, repeated assumptions shape beliefs, identities, and entire worldviews. People internalize accusations without evidence, absorb labels without questioning, and live inside cages built from language itself. This is why manipulators love presuppositions. They don't have to prove anything. They just have to phrase it in a way that makes you prove yourself against assumptions you never agreed to. It's not a debate. It's a silent rewriting of reality, hidden in plain sight. Premature forgiveness. Forgiveness is often seen as one of the highest virtues. We are told from childhood that to forgive is noble, that to hold on to anger is destructive, that letting go is the path to healing. And in its true form, forgiveness can indeed be powerful, a release of bitterness, a reclaiming of peace. But when forgiveness is rushed, demanded, or manipulated, it loses its beauty and becomes something else entirely. This is the danger of premature forgiveness, when someone insists on being forgiven before trust is rebuilt, before accountability is met, before the wounds have even begun to heal. Premature forgiveness is not about reconciliation. It is about erasure. It is a way of skipping over discomfort, avoiding consequences, and silencing the pain of the one who was harmed. It demands a shortcut. Let's just move on. But moving on without addressing the root is not healing. It is denial disguised as virtue. Imagine a partner who cheats in a relationship. Days later, they weep, apologize, and immediately ask for forgiveness. The betrayal is fresh, the wounds raw, but they insist, if you really love me, you'll forgive me right now. The request isn't about rebuilding trust. It's about bypassing the discomfort of accountability. By demanding forgiveness prematurely, they shift the focus from their betrayal to your supposed cruelty for not being merciful enough. The harm they caused is minimized, while the responsibility to forgive becomes the new burden. Parents often use this tactic with children. A parent lashes out in anger, says something cruel, then demands a quick hug and forgiveness. The child, still hurting, is pressured to let go before they've even processed the pain. Over time, the child learns that their emotions are secondary, that their hurt must be silenced for harmony's sake. The parent avoids accountability by weaponizing the weight of forgiveness. Workplaces use premature forgiveness too. A manager might belittle an employee publicly, then later offer a shallow apology. I'm sorry if you were offended. Immediately after, they expect everything to return to normal, as if the harm was erased by those hollow words. The employee, fearing retaliation, often accepts the apology and pretends forgiveness, but the underlying wound festers. The forgiveness wasn't healing, it was forced compliance. Religious communities sometimes reinforce this dynamic. Victims of abuse may be pressured to forgive their abusers quickly in the name of spiritual virtue. Sermons frame forgiveness as a duty, a test of holiness. The pressure silences victims who feel guilty for holding on to anger. Premature forgiveness becomes another layer of harm, placing the responsibility for healing not on the abuser, but on the abused. The cycle of harm continues, protected by a distorted notion of grace. In friendships, this tactic can appear as guilt trips. A friend betrays your trust, then says, "I already said I was sorry. What more do you want?" The implication is that your pain is excessive, that you are cruel for not moving on instantly. The apology becomes a performance designed not to repair but to reset. Forgiveness, demanded prematurely, is transformed from a gift into an obligation. The genius of premature forgiveness is that it flips the roles. The person who caused harm becomes the one suffering, impatient, desperate, pitiful. The person who was harmed becomes the villain, accused of cruelty, stubbornness, or bitterness for not forgiving fast enough. Accountability evaporates, replaced by pressure to demonstrate kindness. The narrative shifts. The victim is on trial, not the perpetrator. Why does this work so effectively? Because forgiveness has been romanticized. Society glorifies those who forgive quickly, portraying them as stronger, wiser, morally superior. To withhold forgiveness is framed as weakness, as being stuck in the past. Manipulators exploit this cultural script, knowing that most people will feel guilty for holding boundaries. They demand forgiveness not to restore balance, but to preserve their image. Premature forgiveness poisons relationships because it creates false closure. The wound is covered, but not cleaned. Resentment festers beneath the surface, unspoken but alive. Trust is not rebuilt, only buried. Eventually, the same harm often repeats because the cycle was never broken. It was only smoothed over by rushed absolution. This tactic is especially cruel in cycles of abuse. After each episode of harm, the abuser apologizes, cries, and demands forgiveness. The victim, exhausted, gives in, hoping things will change. But the apology was never meant to be transformative. It was a reset button, clearing the slate without real accountability. The cycle continues, each round faster, each forgiveness cheaper, until the victim no longer trusts their own anger. Even in larger systems, premature forgiveness is weaponized. Nations demand that oppressed groups move on from historical injustices, framing calls for accountability as living in the past. Corporations caught in scandals issue quick apologies and expect immediate absolution, counting on the public's short attention span. In both cases, forgiveness is demanded not for healing, but for convenience. The tragedy of premature forgiveness is that it teaches people to silence their own pain. Victims begin to doubt themselves. Am I bitter? Am I cruel? Am I weak for still feeling hurt? They rush to forgive before they are ready, betraying their own healing in the process. Forgiven, S becomes another performance, another mask, instead of a genuine act of release. But forgiveness, real forgiveness, cannot be rushed. It is not a transaction. It is not a performance. It is a journey that unfolds only when accountability has been met, when the wound has been acknowledged, when the person harmed feels safe enough to let go. Anything less is not forgiveness. It is suppression. To protect yourself, you must reclaim the right to timing. You are under no obligation to forgive on someone else's schedule. You are allowed to feel the weight of your pain, to process it fully, to demand accountability before absolution. Forgiveness is yours to give, not theirs to demand. Premature forgiveness is not healing. It is a mask, a shortcut, a manipulation. It silences pain instead of honoring it, erases wounds instead of tending them, and protects the one who caused harm instead of the one who endured it. Real forgiveness may come someday, or it may not. But either way, it cannot be forced. Because forgiveness, to mean anything at all, must be free. And anything demanded prematurely is not freedom. It is control. Strategic silence. Silence is often mistaken for emptiness. People assume that if nothing is being said, nothing is happening. But silence is never neutral. In human interactions, silence can comfort, confuse, or crush. It can be the warm pause between friends who don't need words to feel close, or it can be the cold void that leaves someone begging for answers. This duality makes silence one of the most underestimated weapons of manipulation. When used intentionally, it becomes strategic silence, not the absence of speech, but the calculated withholding of it to dominate, destabilize, or control. Strategic silence is different from healthy quiet. Healthy silence respects space, allows emotions to breathe, and gives time for reflection. Strategic silence, however, has an agenda. It is silence wielded like a blade, designed to unsettle, to make others question themselves, to reclaim power without lifting a finger. Picture an argument between two partners. One of them demands clarity, begs for communication, asks for an explanation. The other simply withdraws into silence. No answers, no eye contact, no acknowledgement. Hours pass. The silence grows louder than words ever could. The one left speaking begins to spiral, replaying the fight, doubting their own memory, wondering if they have done something unforgivable. The manipulator doesn't have to argue. Their silence itself becomes a psychological chokehold. This tactic is often called the silent treatment, but strategic silence goes deeper. It isn't just ignoring someone out of pettiness. It is a deliberate refusal to respond, knowing that the human brain craves feedback. When no response comes, the mind fills the void with self-doubt. Did I say something wrong? Am I overreacting? Are they angry? Do they hate me? Silence forces you into a mental maze, while the silent one watches from the outside, maintaining control. While workplaces exploit strategic silence in subtle but powerful ways. Imagine presenting an idea to your boss. Instead of feedback, you're met with blank stares or a vague, prolonged silence. You leave the meeting wondering if your idea was stupid, if you embarrassed yourself, if you should even speak up again. The silence wasn't accidental. It was a tactic to keep you cautious, hesitant, less likely to challenge authority again. In organizations, silence often does more to enforce hierarchy than outright criticism. Parents sometimes use this tactic too. A child misbehaves or expresses emotions the parent disapproves of. Instead of talking, the parent withdraws affection. No words, no eye contact, just silence. For the child, whose survival depends on connection, the absence feels unbearable. They learn quickly. Certain emotions or truths lead to disconnection. Strategic silence becomes a form of conditioning, shaping behavior through withdrawal rather than open dialogue. In friendships, strategic silence can appear as ghosting or selective ignoring. A friend suddenly stops replying to texts, withholding attention to punish or control. The silence forces the other person to chase, to apologize, to overcompensate, even when they have done nothing wrong. The friendship survives, but only on terms dictated by the silent one. Politics and diplomacy weaponize silence too. Leaders refuse to comment. Governments withhold statements. Officials delay responses. Each pause creates speculation, fear, or desperation. By saying nothing, they force others to fill the gap with guesses, concessions, or panic. Strategic silence in these contexts is not weakness. It is dominance disguised as restraint. Why does this tactic work so effectively? Because humans are wired to seek meaning. Silence is ambiguous, and ambiguity is painful. When faced with silence, our brains rush to interpret it. We analyze tone, body language, past behavior, anything that might explain the void. The manipulator knows this. They don't have to tell you what to think. Your own mind will do the work, often against you. Romantic relationships illustrate this most painfully. Silence after intimacy, silence after betrayal, silence in moments when words are most needed. Each creates a vacuum that forces the other person to chase. The more you chase, the more power shifts away from you. The silent partner controls the pace of the relationship without ever raising their voice. Strategic silence also thrives in groups. Imagine a team meeting where one member raises a concern. Everyone else, perhaps under the leader's influence, falls silent. No agreement, no disagreement, just a heavy, collective quiet. The person who spoke feels exposed, foolish, out of place. The silence itself delivers the message, you are alone. No words are needed to enforce conformity. This tactic is particularly cruel because it masquerades as peace. A silent person cannot be accused of shouting, insulting, or fighting. On the surface, they look calm, even mature, but beneath the stillness lies intent, to dominate the emotional landscape without appearing aggressive. The silent one escapes accountability, while the other carries the burden of confusion. Consider also how silence is used after harm. Someone insults you, betrays you, or wounds you. When you confront them, they offer no response. Their silence communicates indifference, as if your pain doesn't matter enough to deserve words. This deepens the wound more than denial ever could. Strategic silence doesn't just evade responsibility, It invalidates your experience altogether. In some cases, silence is used to rewrite history. By never acknowledging what happened, the silent manipulator leaves events open to reinterpretation. Over time, the lack of words erodes your certainty. Did it really happen that way? Am I exaggerating? Without verbal acknowledgement, your memory becomes shakier, easier to dismiss. Silence, here, becomes a weapon of gaslighting. Strategic silence is not always loud and obvious. Sometimes it appears as subtle pauses, delayed responses, or selective ignoring, but the pattern reveals itself. Silence always arrives when the manipulator risks losing power, accountability, or control. It is a shield made of nothingness, but its impact is heavy. The defense is awareness. Recognize that silence itself is communication. If someone consistently withholds words in moments when accountability or intimacy is needed, it is not neutrality. It is strategy. Refuse to chase endlessly. Sometimes the only way to break the cycle is to step back and let the silence sit with them, instead of letting it consume you. Silence can heal or it can harm. In its pure form, it creates space for reflection, intimacy, and peace. But when wielded strategically, it becomes a weapon sharper than words. Strategic silence doesn't just withhold sound. It withholds acknowledgement, clarity, and care. And in doing so, it speaks volumes. Volumes that crush, manipulate, and control. Implanted doubt. Doubt in its natural form can be healthy. It is the spark that pushes us to question, to investigate, to seek truth beyond appearances. Doubt protects us from naivety and keeps us cautious in a complex world. But when doubt is planted deliberately, not as truth-seeking, but as sabotage, it becomes poison. This is the tactic of implanted doubt, the subtle art of slipping seeds of uncertainty into someone's mind until they no longer trust themselves, their memories, or their worth. Implanted doubt doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't tell you outright that you're wrong or worthless. Instead, it lingers in carefully chosen phrases. Are you sure? That doesn't sound right. You always remember things differently. Small comments, strategically placed, slowly erode confidence. Over time, you begin to second-guess everything, not because reality has changed, but because the frame of your perception has been tampered with. Imagine a partner who constantly undermines your memory. You recall an event clearly, but they shake their head and say, "That never happened," or "You're exaggerating again." At first you resist, but repetition wears down resistance. Slowly the certainty you once had crumbles. You stop trusting your recollections. You defer to theirs. This is implanted doubt at its core, reshaping your mind so that their version of reality feels safer than your own. Workplaces are rife with this tactic. An employee raises a valid concern in a meeting, and the manager responds, "Are you sure you're not overthinking this? You do tend to get stressed easily." The statement seems harmless, but it plants a seed. The employee wonders if they are indeed overreacting. The doubt festers, not because their point lacked merit, but because their confidence was surgically cut down. In time, they stop speaking up altogether. Parents sometimes use implanted do-you-beat unconsciously, shaping their children's identities through subtle dismissals. A child says, "I want to be an artist," and the parent replies, "Are you sure? You're not really creative." Years later, the child hesitates every time they pick up a pencil, haunted by a seed planted long ago. The doubt becomes a cage, holding them back from paths they might have flourished in. In friendships, this tactic can appear in comparisons. "Are you sure you belong here? Everyone else seems more confident than you." The comment may seem casual, even concerned, but its impact runs deep. It implants the idea that you are an outsider, that your place is conditional. Doubt begins to shadow every interaction, making you question whether you truly fit in. Media and politics weaponize implanted doubt on a larger scale. Propaganda doesn't always try to convince you of a clear lie. Often it merely clouds certainty. Conflicting reports, half-truths, and loaded questions are released not to clarify, but to confuse. Citizens are left wondering, what's real? Who can I trust? The doubt paralyzes action. When truth feels unreachable, people surrender to apathy or cling blindly to the loudest voice. Implanted doubt, at scale, undermines entire societies. The cruel genius of this tactic is that once implanted, doubt grows on its own. A single comment can echo in the mind for years. You replay it, reinterpret it, expand it. The manipulator doesn't have to repeat themselves. Your brain does the work for them. Like a parasite, the doubt feeds on your insecurities, multiplying in silence until you no longer know what to believe. Romantic abusers exploit this ruthlessly. They'll say things like, "You're lucky I'm with you, no one else would put up with you." The seed is planted. Maybe you are unlovable. Maybe this is the best you'll ever get. Even if part of you resists, the doubt lingers. The longer you stay, the stronger it grows. Soon you cling to the very person who poisoned you, because the doubt has convinced you that leaving would prove your worst fears true. Implanted doubt also thrives in delayed reactions. A manipulator doesn't always challenge you in the moment. Instead, they plant doubt later. That thing you said last night, are you sure it made sense? You replay the entire interaction in your head, wondering if you embarrassed yourself. The doubt gnaws at you quietly, long after the moment has passed. Why is implanted doubt so effective? Because humans crave certainty, and when certainty is disrupted, we become desperate to restore it. If someone positions themselves as the anchor, the one who knows better, we lean toward them for stability. The manipulator doesn't need to prove their superiority. They only need to destabilize yours. By eroding your confidence, they become the safer ground to stand on. Even teachers or mentors can fall into this pattern. A student expresses a new idea, and the mentor replies, "Are you sure you're smart enough to handle that?" The seed seems small, perhaps even framed as tough love, but it grows into lifelong hesitation. Doubt lingers long after the teacher is gone, shaping choices in adulthood. Cults and extremist groups excel at implanted doubt. New members are told, "The outside world will always lie to you. Only we tell the truth." The statement implants doubt in every other voice. Soon, when family or friends try to intervene, the recruit's mind rejects them. Maybe they really are lying. The seed of doubt isolates them, making the group's narrative the only safe harbor. Implanted doubt doesn't always target memory or intelligence. Sometimes it targets morality. "Are you sure you're a good person?" a manipulator might ask after twisting events to make you feel guilty. The question embeds itself like a splinter. You replay your actions, your words, your intentions, searching for proof of your goodness. The doubt shifts your identity, making you easier to control because you are constantly seeking reassurance. The tragedy of implanted doubt is that it often masquerades as care. A manipulator may disguise it as concern. "I'm just looking out for you. Are you sure you can handle this?" The words sound protective, but the effect is undermining. You internalize the doubt, mistaking it for love, never realizing that what is being planted isn't guidance but dependence. The defense lies in recognizing the difference between constructive questioning and implanted doubt. Constructive questioning challenges you, but still empowers you. It invites reflection without erasing confidence. Implanted doubt, on the other hand, strips away trust in yourself, leaving you weaker. The key is to notice the aftermath. Do you feel clearer after someone's words, or smaller? Do you feel guided or undermined? Implanted doubt is not about helping you grow. It is about making you shrink. It doesn't guide you toward truth. It pulls you away from yourself. And once the seed is planted, it can live for years, shaping choices, stifling dreams, and binding you to those who pretend to be your anchor. To reclaim yourself, you must learn to uproot the seeds. Catch the whispers. Are you sure? Pause and ask, why are they planting this? Who benefits if I doubt myself? Often the answer reveals itself. Doubt serves the manipulator, not you. Implanted doubt isn't a reflection of your weakness. It's a reflection of someone else's strategy, and the greatest resistance is to trust your own ground again, even if your voice trembles. Because once you reclaim certainty from those who seek to poison it, their power dissolves into silence. Gradual normalization. Human beings are adaptable. This adaptability has allowed us to survive in harsh climates, recover from disasters, and evolve across centuries. But the very trait that keeps us alive can also be used against us. We don't just adapt to good things, we adapt to harm too. And when harm arrives, not as a sudden storm, but as a slow drizzle, we often fail to notice it until we are drowning. This is the essence of gradual normalization, the process of slowly introducing dysfunction, abuse, or injustice until it feels ordinary, acceptable, even inevitable. Unlike overt manipulation, gradual normalization is subtle. It doesn't demand immediate surrender. It works in increments, step by step, until what once would have shocked you now barely registers. The manipulator knows that people resist sudden change, but they rarely resist slow shifts. A line that would have seemed unthinkable yesterday feels tolerable today, and tomorrow it becomes the new baseline. By the time you realize what has happened, the unacceptable has been woven into the fabric of your life. Think of a toxic relationship. In the beginning, everything feels perfect. The affection is overwhelming, the gestures grand, the love intoxicating. Then one day, a small red flag appears, a rude comment, a dismissive remark. It stings, but it seems isolated. Days later, another appears, a raised voice, a moment of control. The moments are spaced out, diluted with apologies or affection. Over time, the frequency increases. What once would have made you walk away now feels just part of the relationship. This is how abuse hides, not in the extremes, but in the gradual erosion of what you accept. Workplaces use gradual normalization too. Imagine being asked to stay late once. You agree, thinking it's an exception. The next week, it happens again. Months later, staying late is expected, unpaid, acknowledged. The shift was so slow that no one protested. Employees don't notice they've been reconditioned because the new standard arrived inch by inch. What began as a favor becomes an obligation, normalized through repetition. Societies fall into this trap on a massive scale. Freedoms are rarely taken away all at once. They are chipped away bit by bit. A new rule here, a new restriction there. Each one feels temporary, justified, even necessary. But over years, the collective baseline shifts. Citizens accept levels of surveillance, censorship, or inequality that their grandparents would have considered outrageous. The unacceptable becomes ordinary, not through force, but through gradual acclimatization. Parents sometimes unconsciously impose gradual normalization on their children. A parent might initially forbid certain behaviors harshly, then slowly escalate their control until the child has no autonomy at all. The child doesn't rebel because the changes come in the stages, always framed as what's best for you. By adulthood, they may not even recognize the loss of freedom. It has been normalized since childhood. Friendships also illustrate this tactic. A friend may begin by making small jokes at your expense. You laugh it off, telling yourself it's harmless. Slowly the jokes grow sharper, more frequent, more humiliating. Over time, others in the group join in. The ridicule becomes part of the dynamic. What started as a single cutting remark has become a culture of mockery. And you barely noticed when the line was crossed. The genius of gradual normalization is that it makes people complicit in their own conditioning. Because the shifts are small, you rationalize them. It's not that bad. It's just once in a while. Things could be worse. Each rationalization lowers your defenses, making the next step easier to accept. By the time you recognize the full picture, you are already deep inside the cage. Manipulators often combine gradual normalization with love bombing. They alternate between kindness and harm, creating confusion. The kindness keeps hope alive, while the harm becomes easier to excuse. You tell yourself, they're not always like this. Slowly the harm increases, the kindness decreases, but your tolerance has already adjusted. What would have broken you in the beginning now feels survivable. History offers chilling examples. Dictators rarely seize power by declaring tyranny overnight. They rise through incremental changes, restricting one group's rights, silencing one critic, passing one law. Each step feels manageable, almost invisible, but step by step, the society transforms. Citizens wake up one day in a system they never would have accepted outright, wondering how it happened. The answer? Gradual normalization. Even in personal habits, this phenomenon appears. Consider someone who begins smoking just socially. Over time, it becomes once a week, then daily, then multiple times a day. The shift was so gradual that they never recognized the addiction forming. Normalization works not only on external manipulation, but on our own behaviors. We excuse each step until the pattern is locked in. Why does gradual normalization work so powerfully? Because humans measure change relative to what came before. If today looks only slightly worse than yesterday, we tolerate it. But if today were compared directly to last year, the difference would be shocking. Manipulators rely on this short memory. They don't need to leap across the line. They just need to move it slowly enough that no one notices. The most dangerous part of gradual normalization is that it makes victims doubt themselves. When the changes are small, calling them out feels dramatic. Am I overreacting? Was it really that bad? Others, equally acclimatized, may dismiss concerns. That's just who it is. The victim feels isolated, convinced that their discomfort is the problem, not the situation itself. To defend against this tactic, awareness is key. Ask yourself, what has changed over time? What would my past self have thought of this? Would I have accepted this if it happened all at once? These questions help you step outside the slow drift of normalization and see the bigger picture. Gradual normalization thrives on silence, on small concessions, on the belief that it's not worth fighting over. But every concession sets a precedent. Every silence moves the baseline. Over time, the line between acceptable and unacceptable disappears. And by the time you realize it, you've adapted to a life you never would have chosen. Gradual normalization isn't just about survival. It's about control. It teaches you to live inside cages you would have once rejected, to carry weights you would have once thrown off, to accept what should never be acceptable. The greatest resistance is to notice the shift early, to refuse to let the unacceptable become ordinary, no matter how slowly it arrives. Semantic traps as language is one of humanity's greatest tools. With words, we share ideas, create meaning, and build bridges between minds. But language can also become a cage. Words can be twisted, definitions manipulated, and conversations rigged so that you are trapped not by facts, but by the very meanings of the terms being used. This is the tactic of semantic traps, using words in a way that boxes you in, making you lose the argument before you even realize what game you're playing. Semantic traps don't rely on truth or falsehood. They rely on framing. By shifting the meaning of a word, or by loading it with hidden assumptions, manipulators create a battlefield where every path leads to their victory. You're not fighting over reality. You're fighting over definitions. And once the terms are rigged, your responses only tighten the trap. Consider a workplace example. An employee raises a concern about unfair treatment, and the manager replies, "Why are you being so negative?" In that moment, the issue is no longer about fairness. It has been reframed as negativity. To continue pressing means to look defensive, emotional, or ungrateful. The semantic trap has shifted the meaning of your behavior. You're no longer a responsible employee raising concerns. You're a negative person who needs to lighten up. In relationships, semantic traps appear frequently. A partner might say, "If you really loved me, you'd prove it." The word love has been hijacked. Instead of being about mutual respect and care, it is now redefined as blind compliance. To resist means you don't love them. To comply means losing yourself. Either way, you're trapped inside a word that no longer carries its true meaning. Parents often use this tactic with children. A child might say, "That's not fair," and the parent responds, "Life isn't fair." The semantic trap dismisses the child's concern by redefining fairness as unattainable, inevitable. The conversation is no longer about the parent's responsibility, but about the cruelty of life itself. The word fair has been emptied of meaning, leaving the child silenced. Politics is filled with semantic traps. Leaders manipulate terms like patriotism, freedom, or security to fit their agenda. If you criticize the government, you're unpatriotic. Here, patriotism is redefined not as love of country, but as loyalty to authority. Citizens are trapped. To dissent means to betray their nation. To comply means to accept silence. By controlling definitions, leaders control the narrative, and by controlling the narrative, they control the people. Semantic traps often work through false binaries. For example, "You're either with us or against us." The trap lies in the structure. The complexity of reality is erased. No middle ground, no nuance, no alternative. The conversation is boxed into two meanings: loyalty or betrayal. And whichever side you choose, the manipulator dictates the frame. Religious groups weaponize this tactic as well. Words like faith or sin are loaded with redefined meanings. Questioning may be labeled as lack of faith, while obedience is praised as devotion. The trap works because the terms are powerful, emotionally charged, and deeply tied to identity. Once you accept the group's definitions, your choices are limited to compliance or condemnation. Even friendships can fall into semantic traps. A friend might accuse you, "You're selfish." The word selfish is vague, slippery. Does setting boundaries mean selfishness? Does saying no mean selfishness? The trap lies in how the word is defined. You scramble to defend yourself, but the term has already poisoned the interaction. The manipulator doesn't need evidence. They just need a word that sticks. Why are semantic traps so powerful? Because words shape thought. If you accept the manipulator's definition, you unconsciously begin to live inside it. The more you argue within their frame, the more power you give them. You aren't just defending yourself. You're reinforcing their control over meaning. Semantic traps also thrive in public perception. Imagine an activist being labeled radical. The term doesn't address their ideas, their evidence, or their cause. It collapses complexity into a single loaded word. The public, hearing the label, dismisses the activist without examining the truth. The trap silences not through logic, but through semantics. Even in intimate moments, semantic traps can erode trust. A partner says, "You're too sensitive." The phrase doesn't engage with your feelings. It dismisses them. The definition of sensitivity shifts from being human and empathetic to being flawed and irrational. Your emotions are trapped inside a word that invalidates them. You begin to wonder, am I really too sensitive? Am I the problem? The trap doesn't just silence you in the moment. It reshapes how you see yourself. Workplaces love to dress exploitation in positive semantics. Overwork is reframed as dedication. Lack of boundaries is called team spirit. Silence is praised as professionalism. Employees who resist are labeled difficult or ungrateful. None of these labels describe reality. They are semantic traps designed to enforce compliance while keeping the company's image clean. The cruelest aspect of semantic traps is how invisible they are. Because words feel familiar, we rarely stop to question their meaning. When someone says respect, we assume we're on the same page. But manipulators twist meanings until the word serves their agenda. Respect no longer means mutual care. It means obedience. Trust no longer means reliability. It means blind faith. Love, no low. Anger means connection. It means submission. By the time you realize the definitions have shifted, you're already trapped inside them. The defense lies in slowing down and interrogating language. When faced with a loaded term, ask, "What do you mean by that? How are you defining this word?" By pulling the conversation back to definitions, you disrupt the trap. You refuse to argue within their frame, instead demanding clarity. Often, manipulators will resist this step because the power of the trap lies in keeping definitions vague. Semantic traps are dangerous because they turn language, the very thing we use to find truth, into a maze that hides it. They silence dissent, erase nuance, and make people fight shadows instead of reality. And the more you accept their terms, the deeper you wander into the maze. But language can also be reclaimed by noticing when words are being twisted, by refusing to accept definitions blindly, by insisting on clarity. You break the trap. Words regain their true meaning. And with that, conversations can return to what they were meant to be. Not cages, but bridges between minds. Reputation is fragile. It takes years to build. Yet a single rumor, a single story, a single whisper can undo it. Because humans rely on reputation to assess trustworthiness, those who understand how to manipulate it hold immense power. And one of the most insidious ways to shape perception is through reputation seeding, the quiet planting of ideas, impressions, or rumors that grow over time into an image people accept as truth, even without evidence. Unlike outright slander, reputation seeding doesn't look aggressive. It rarely announces itself as an attack. Instead, it begins with small comments, casual remarks, or subtle suggestions. A manipulator doesn't need to prove anything. They just need to plant a seed of doubt, of suspicion, of narrative. Over time, others water that seed with gossip, assumptions, and repetition. Before long, the seed has grown into a reputation that feels undeniable, even if it was never true. Imagine a workplace scenario. A manager wants to undermine a promising employee who might threaten their position. Instead of openly criticizing, they drop small remarks. She's ambitious, maybe too ambitious. Or, he's smart, but you never know if he can be trusted under pressure. These statements aren't direct accusations. They're seeds. The listener stores them away unconsciously, and later, when the employee makes a mistake, the seed blossoms into confirmation. See? I knew she was too ambitious. I knew he was unreliable. The manipulator doesn't need to push harder. The seed grows on its own. Reputation seeding thrives in relationships too. A controlling partner may begin isolating their significant other by quietly undermining them with friends or family. She worries too much. He drinks more than he should. They mean well, but you can't always rely on them. These small phrases, repeated enough times, begin to shape how others see the person. Soon, if conflict arises in the relationship, outsiders side with the manipulator, not because they witness the truth, but because the seeds have already taken root. Social groups rely on this tactic to enforce conformity. A person who questions the group might be casually labeled negative or difficult. Once the seed is planted, every word they say is filtered through that frame. A valid concern becomes complaining. A thoughtful challenge becomes stubbornness. The group no longer sees the person's actions clearly. They see the seed, sprouted into an identity. Parents sometimes use reputation seeding with siblings. One child is labeled the smart one, another the troublemaker, another the sensitive one. These seeds shape not just how parents treat their children, but how the children see themselves. The troublemaker may begin acting out more, fulfilling the prophecy. The sensitive one may doubt their resilience, even in adulthood. The seeds planted in childhood grow into reputations that define entire lives. Reputation seeding is especially dangerous because it exploits human psychology. People trust patterns. When they hear something once, it's just information. When they hear it twice, it feels like coincidence. When they hear it 3 times, it becomes truth. Repetition, not evidence, cements belief. Manipulators know this. They don't need to launch a smear campaign. They only need to whisper the same idea enough times for it to stick. This tactic thrives online, where reputations can be destroyed in hours. A single tweet, a clipped video, a vague accusation can go viral. Even if it's disproven later, the seed remains. People rarely revisit the full story. Once the idea is planted, they're dishonest, they're problematic, they can't be trusted. It lingers, shaping perception long after facts emerge. Online, reputate. Ion seeding is amplified by algorithms, turning whispers into shouts and shadows into permanent stains. Cult leaders and extremist groups also master this tactic. To keep followers loyal, they plant seeds about outsiders. They'll never understand you. They'll try to turn you against us. They're jealous of what we have here. These seeds grow into distrust of family, friends, or society at large. When outsiders express concern, the seeds blossom. See, they're trying to pull you away. The leader was right. Reputation seeding builds walls of suspicion, isolating members from alternative perspectives. The power of reputation seeding lies in its subtlety. Direct accusations can be challenged, but casual comments slip under defenses. If someone says, "He's a liar," you might demand proof. But if someone says, "I don't know, something about him doesn't feel right," you absorb it differently. It feels like intuition, not manipulation. Yet, intuition can be manufactured. The manipulator doesn't tell you what to believe. They make you believe you arrived at the conclusion yourself. Reputation seeding also works in reverse, not just to tear someone down, but to build someone up. A politician might have their team plant stories of their generosity, their wisdom, their brilliance. She's always been a natural leader. He's the kind of man you can trust. The stories don't have to be entirely true. They just need to be repeated. Over time, the seeds blossom into a polished reputation, a narrative people accept without ever questioning. Even in intimate friendships, reputation seeding can be corrosive. Imagine a friend who constantly frames you as the dramatic one. At first, it feels like a joke, but others begin repeating it. Soon, anytime you express emotion, the label surfaces. You're just being dramatic again. Your reputation has been rewritten by repetition. You no longer get to define yourself. the seed has done it for you. Why does this tactic cut so deeply? Because reputation shapes opportunity. A seed planted about your character can cost you friendships, jobs, credibility, and trust. Worse, once a reputation is seeded, it is almost impossible to uproot. People cling to first impressions and resist evidence that contradicts them. A single seed may grow into a forest of bias that shadows you for years. The defense lies in vigilance, not just against what others say about you, but against what you repeat about others. Ask yourself, where did this impression come from? Do I know it firsthand, or was it planted? Am I watering someone else's seed without realizing it? By refusing to absorb or spread unverified narratives, you disrupt the cycle. Reputation seeding is not about truth. It is about influence. It reshapes how people are seen, one whisper at a time, and once the seed is planted, it doesn't need the manipulator anymore. The world waters it for them. That is the true danger. Reputations don't just grow from actions, they grow from stories. And whoever controls the story, controls the person. Reverse victimhood. Victimhood carries weight. When someone is hurt, ignored, or mistreated, their pain deserves acknowledgement. To recognize suffering is to honor our shared humanity. But manipulators have learned to hijack this sacred space. Instead of taking accountability, they twist the narrative, flipping the roles so that the one who caused harm becomes the one who appears harmed. This is the tactic of reverse victimhood, the art of claiming the role of the victim in order to deflect responsibility, gain sympathy, and silence those they've wronged. At first glance, reverse victimhood looks like vulnerability. Tears, apologies, dramatic sighs. But look closer and you'll see that the performance isn't about healing. It's about power. By casting themselves as the victim, manipulators force others into roles. You become the aggressor, even if you were the one harmed. Their pain, real or exaggerated, takes center stage, pushing your pain into the shadows. Imagine confronting a partner about their lies. Instead of admitting the truth, they break down crying. I can't believe you would accuse me like this after everything I've been through. In seconds, the argument shifts. You're no longer addressing their betrayal. You're defending yourself against the charge of cruelty. The manipulator doesn't need to deny the lie. They just need to appear wounded enough to make you drop your guard. Reverse victimhood reframes accountability as attack, turning justice into guilt. Workplaces are filled with this maneuver. An employee called out for bullying a colleague may say, "Everyone is always against me, I'm just misunderstood." Suddenly, the bully is no longer the aggressor, but the misunderstood outcast. Coworkers hesitate to push further, fearing they'll look like part of a witch hunt. The real victim is silenced, their pain overshadowed by the manipulator's performance of Sufi. Freeing families often entrench this tactic deeply. A child might express how a parent's words wounded them, only to hear, "After everything I've done for you, how dare you treat me like the bad guy?" The parent's hurt feelings now dominate the conversation, and the child's pain is erased. The parent has flipped the script, turning themselves into the victim of ingratitude instead of facing their role in causing harm. Over time, children raised in such environments learn to doubt their right to speak, fearing they'll always be cast as cruel for acknowledging their wounds. Friendships also suffer under this tactic. Imagine calling out a friend for repeatedly canceling plans at the last minute. Instead of apologizing, they reply, "You don't understand how hard my life is right now. Everyone thinks I'm selfish." The criticism disappears under a flood of self-pity. You hesitate, backtrack, even comfort them. The manipulator wins by burying your valid frustration under their claim of being misunderstood and mistreated. Reverse victimhood thrives because it exploits empathy. Most people don't want to see others suffer. When someone claims victimhood, we instinctively soften. We want to comfort. We want to ease their pain. Manipulators know this. They weaponize compassion, knowing that sympathy can disarm anger faster than any denial. Instead of arguing facts, they argue feelings. And feelings, once engaged, are harder to challenge. Politics and media weaponize this tactic on a grand scale. Leaders caught abusing power often frame themselves as victims of persecution. The media is out to get me. This is a witch hunt. Instead of addressing corruption, the narrative shifts to their supposed suffering at the hands of enemies. Supporters rally, not because the leader is innocent, but because the leader has successfully claimed victimhood. accountability evaporates under 2. The weight of sympathy and tribal loyalty. Cults and extremist groups use reverse victimhood to strengthen loyalty. Leaders tell followers, "They will call us evil, they will call us liars, but that's because they're afraid of our truth. We are the real victims of society's oppression." By framing themselves as persecuted underdogs, they transform criticism into proof of their righteousness. Outsiders become villains, and the group bonds tighter in shared victimhood, even when the group itself causes immense harm. The cruelty of reverse victimhood is that it invalidates genuine pain. When manipulators claim victimhood falsely, they dilute the power of real victims' voices. Worse, they often overshadow the actual victims in the very moment those victims seek acknowledgement. In relationships, workplaces, families, or society, the one who dares to speak up is painted as the aggressor. Their courage is reframed as cruelty. Their truth becomes an attack. Why does this tactic work so well? Because of what psychologists call the drama triangle. In this dynamic, people shift between 3 roles: victim, rescuer, and persecutor. Manipulators exploit this by claiming the victim role, forcing others into rescuer or persecutor positions. If you push for accountability, you're cast as the persecutor. If you soften and comfort, you're the rescuer, reinforcing their performance. Either way, the manipulator controls the script. Reverse victimhood also works because of cultural conditioning. Many societies praise forgiveness and empathy while shaming anger or confrontation. A manipulator who cries or claims suffering triggers those values, making the one demanding accountability look harsh or unforgiving. The cultural script itself protects the manipulator, discouraging others from challenging the narrative. In abusive cycles, reverse victimhood becomes the reset button. After each episode of harm, the abuser claims to be a true victim. "You make me act this way. I'm the one who's really hurt here." The victim, exhausted and guilt-ridden, comforts the abuser instead of demanding change. Over time, the roles become so blurred that victims forget who caused the harm. They begin to believe they are the aggressors, trapped in a web of manufactured guilt. The defense against reverse victimhood is clarity. You must learn to separate feelings from facts. Yes, the manipulator may truly feel upset, ashamed, or misunderstood, but their feelings do not erase their actions. Their tears do not undo their choices. Their pain, whether genuine or staged, does not absolve accountability. Compassion should not mean complicity. To resist, hold on to the sequence of events. Who did what and when. Stick to facts, even as the manipulator tries to drown you in emotions. Remind yourself, feeling sorry for them does not erase the harm they caused. Empathy can coexist with boundaries. You can acknowledge their feelings without surrendering the truth of your own. Reverse victimhood is not about healing. It is about control. It reframes aggressors as sufferers, silences real victims, and confuses witnesses. It thrives on sympathy, weaponizes compassion, and leaves justice in ruins. But awareness is resistance. Once you see the pattern, the spell breaks. You learn to spot the performance, to separate genuine vulnerability from strategic self-pity. And when you refuse to be cast as persecutor or rescuer, the manipulator loses the stage. Because in the end, reverse victimhood isn't about truth. It's about narrative. And the most powerful act of defiance is to reclaim your story, refusing to let it be rewritten by those who harmed you in the first place. Emotional calibration. Emotions are the invisible language of human connection. A sigh, a smile, a pause before answering. All of these carry meaning far beyond words. To share emotions honestly is to build trust, to show humanity, to reveal what is real beneath the surface. But emotions can also be manipulated. They can be measured, adjusted, and deployed like tools to bend others into compliance. This is the tactic of emotional calibration, the deliberate tuning of emotional responses to achieve control, making others question their own reactions while staying anchored to the manipulator's rhythm. At its core, emotional calibration is about setting the thermostat of the relationship. The manipulator doesn't need to control everything you feel directly. They just need to adjust their own emotional displays in ways that train you to match them. Over time, you begin to calibrate yourself to their moods, their silences, their tones, until your emotions no longer belong to you, but to the emotional climate they control. Imagine a partner who explodes with anger at small things: a misplaced item, a delayed text, a minor disagreement. The intensity shocks you. To avoid conflict, you begin tiptoeing, lowering your voice, choosing words carefully. Slowly, your entire emotional range bends around their volatility. Then, on other days, they are unusually calm, distant, or affectionate. You adjust again, always seeking alignment, always calibrating yourself to them. Eventually, you don't ask, "What do I feel?" Instead, you ask, "What mood are they in? And how should I adjust?" Your emotions become reactions, not expressions. Workplaces use this tactic too, especially under authoritarian leaders. A boss might alternate between public praise and silent hostility. One week, they beam with approval, making everyone feel valued. The next week, they're cold and withdrawn, offering no explanation. Employees scramble to adjust, desperate to win back approval. The uncertainty forces them to regulate their own emotions constantly, never secure, always tuned to the shifting frequencies of the boss. The work environment becomes less about productivity and more about emotional survival. Parents, intentionally or not, often calibrate children through their own reactions. A child cries, and instead of comfort, the parent rolls their eyes or mocks them. Stop being dramatic. The child learns to suppress sadness, not because the feeling disappears, but because the emotional climate punishes it. Later, the same parent may reward anger or obedience with attention, teaching the child which emotions are safe and which must be buried. The calibration begins in childhood but lasts a lifetime, shaping how adults express or silence themselves in relationships. Friendships, too, can be distorted this way. Imagine a friend who offers warmth and laughter when you agree with them, but turns icy the moment you challenge them. Over time, you stop disagreeing. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny, nod along with opinions you don't share. You've been calibrated to their emotional approval. The friendship no longer feels mutual. It feels like a stage where you perform for harmony while silencing yourself to avoid tension. The genius of emotional calibration is that it rarely feels like manipulation. Instead, it feels like adaptation. You tell yourself, "I'm just being considerate. I'm keeping the peace." But beneath the surface, you're reshaping yourself to survive in someone else's climate. And once you've internalized that calibration, you no longer need the manipulator to enforce it. You enforce it on yourself. Think of cults and extremist groups. Leaders use emotional calibration to regulate entire communities. Speeches are designed to stir collective euphoria, followed by sharp rebukes that instill fear. Members swing between ecstasy and shame, learning to calibrate their emotions to the leader's tone. Over time, they lose the ability to trust their individual feelings. Instead, they seek cues from the leader, the group, the ritual. Their emotions are no longer personal. They are programmed. Media exploits this tactic as well. News outlets and influencers calibrate public emotions by carefully orchestrating fear, outrage, or hope. Headlines designed to shock or scare flood audiences with adrenaline. Then, softer stories of unity provide relief. The public learns to ride these waves, unconsciously calibrating their mood to the emotional climate delivered through screens. This keeps people hooked, reactive, and malleable. The cruelty of emotional calibration is how invisible it becomes. Over time, victims stop realizing they're adjusting at all. They think their caution, their silence, their laughter, their hesitation are choices. But they are not free choices. They are conditioned responses, rehearsed through years of tuning themselves to someone else's moods. Why does this tactic work so well? Because humans are wired for attunement. From infancy, we learn to read caregivers' emotions as survival. A baby studies its mother's face, calibrating its cries to smiles, coos, or frowns. This instinct never leaves us. As adults, we still regulate our emotions based on others' responses. Manipulators exploit this primal wiring, turning natural empathy into a leash. In romantic abuse cycles, emotional calibration becomes a trap. The abuser alternates between cruelty and tenderness, anger and affection. The victim learns to anticipate these shifts, regulating themselves to avoid explosions, oceans, and savor rare kindness. It feels like love, but it's conditioning. Each adjustment tightens the bond, making escape harder because the victim's identity has fused with the manipulator's climate. Even silence becomes part of calibration. A manipulator doesn't need to shout. They can simply withdraw affection. You tell them something vulnerable, and they respond with cold silence. You learn quickly. Don't share too much. Next time, you calibrate, holding back to avoid the chill. The manipulator never had to forbid vulnerability. Their silence taught you the lesson. The defense lies in reclaiming your emotional thermostat. Ask yourself, am I feeling this because it's true for me or because I'm adjusting to someone else? Do my moods swing with their approval, or do they remain steady regardless? The more your emotions depend on another person's reactions, the deeper you are inside their calibration. Healing requires relearning self-trust. It means practicing emotions freely, without waiting for approval or fearing disapproval. It means setting boundaries when someone weaponizes silence, mood swings, or volatility to control you. Most of all, it means remembering that empathy should never erase individuality. To feel with others is human. To lose yourself in others' emotions is captivity. Emotional calibration, when used manipulatively, is not about connection. It is about control. It doesn't just shape what you feel in the moment. It reshapes who you become over time. The more you bend, the more you lose your natural rhythm. And the greatest tragedy is that you begin to forget what your authentic emotional range even was before someone else started tuning it for their advantage. But the truth is simple. Your emotions belong to you. They are not levers for others to pull or dials for others to adjust. To reclaim them is to reclaim yourself, your clarity, your entity, your freedom. Exclusivity illusion. Humans crave belonging, but we also crave distinction. To feel part of something special, chosen, or rare satisfies two deep desires at once: connection and superiority. This is the psychological fuel behind the exclusivity illusion. The deliberate creation of a sense that access, approval, or love is limited, reserved only for the select few. It is a mirage, designed to make people fight harder for acceptance, tolerate more for validation, and cling tighter to something they might otherwise question. At its heart, the exclusivity illusion plays on scarcity. We're wired to value what seems rare. Diamonds are just rocks until society declares them precious. VIP clubs are just rooms until a velvet rope makes them feel unattainable. Manipulators use this instinct in relationships, workplaces, groups, and even entire societies, by making people believe that access to them, or to their approval, their knowledge, their love, is limited. They elevate their own value while diminishing yours. Think of a toxic relationship. A partner may create the illusion that their affection is scarce, a prize you must earn. They may say things like, "Not everyone could handle being with me," or "You're lucky I even put up with you." The message is clear. Their presence is rare, and your worth depends on proving you deserve it. Instead of recognizing the manipulation, you work harder, desperate not to lose something framed as exclusive. In friendships, this illusion often appears through gatekeeping. One friend becomes the center of the group, controlling access to events or inside jokes. They drop hints like, "Not everyone gets to be part of this," making inclusion feel conditional. The group begins to orbit them, fearful of exclusion. What could have been equal companionship becomes a hierarchy built on the false scarcity of acceptance. Workplaces deploy this tactic as well. Promotions, titles, or perks are made to feel like rare treasures, even when they are deliberately withheld to foster competition. Leaders say things like, "Only a few people ever get this chance," or "You should be grateful. Not everyone is invited to these meetings." Instead of questioning why opportunities are so scarce, employees scramble to prove loyalty, overworking to earn an illusionary prize. The exclusivity illusion transforms exploitation into ambition. Cults and extremist groups perfect this art. They convince members they are chosen, enlightened, special among billions. Only we see the truth. Only we are strong enough to survive what's coming. The illusion of exclusivity strengthens loyalty because leaving the group doesn't feel like leaving. It feels like falling from chosen to ordinary. The fear of being just another person keeps members clinging to identities built on scarcity. Marketing thrives on exclusivity illusions. Brands sell not just products, but prestige, limited editions, members-only access, exclusive drops. Scarcity increases desire, even when it's artificial. A shirt is just a shirt, But when only 100 are sold worldwide, it becomes a status symbol. People line up for hours, not for the product itself, but for the illusion of being one of the few. The psychology is simple. If others can't have it, it must be valuable. The danger of the exclusivity illusion in relationships is how it distorts self-worth. When someone convinces you their love or approval is rare, you begin to tolerate mistreatment out of fear of losing access. You excuse neglect, accept criticism, or chase breadcrumbs of affection because you've been told, no one else could give you this. You forget that love isn't meant to be rationed like a luxury item. The illusion tricks you into scarcity thinking, where dignity is sacrificed just to keep your place girded. In line, friendships shaped by exclusivity also corrode authenticity. People begin performing, hiding parts of themselves, or silencing disagreements to remain in the inner circle. Instead of mutual connection, the bond becomes transactional. What can you give to maintain your spot? The illusion transforms relationships from spaces of freedom into cages of competition. In families, exclusivity illusions can leave lifelong scars. A parent may elevate one child as the favorite, creating the illusion that love is limited. Siblings compete for affection, each believing they must earn what should have been unconditional. The chosen child carries the burden of perfection, while the others internalize rejection. The illusion teaches them that love is a scarce commodity, shaping how they chase or avoid relationships later in life. Why does this tactic work so effectively? Because scarcity magnifies desire. Psychologists call it the scarcity principle. When opportunities appear limited, their perceived value skyrockets. We fear missing out, being left behind, or losing something irreplaceable. Manipulators exploit this by manufacturing scarcity where none exists. They don't need to prove they're extraordinary, they just need you to believe that access to them is. Exclusivity illusions also exploit our fear of rejection. Humans are tribal by nature. To be excluded from the group once meant death. Though society has changed, the instinct remains. When faced with the threat of exclusion, we will bend, compromise, and contort ourselves to avoid being cast out. The manipulator knows this. They don't have to force loyalty. They just have to hint that your place is precarious. The cruelty of this tactic is that it erodes self-trust. You begin to doubt your worth outside of the exclusive circle. You convince yourself that you could never find love, opportunity, or belonging elsewhere. He manipulator's scarcity narrative becomes your reality. You stop asking, do I want this? Instead, you ask, what must I do to keep this? Your life becomes a constant audition for validation. To resist, you must break the illusion. Ask, is this really scarce, or has someone convinced me it is? Would I tolerate this treatment if I believed I had other options? Often the exclusivity illusion collapses the moment you realize abundance exists outside the narrow circle. There are other friends, other jobs, other opportunities, other loves. What felt irreplaceable was only framed that way to keep you bound. Healthy connection is never built on exclusivity illusions. Real love does not ration itself. Real friendship does not gatekeep. Real leadership does not hoard opportunities to maintain power. What is genuine is not scarce. It expands, it includes, it grows. The exclusivity illusion, at its core, is a lie. It says you are lucky to be chosen, when in truth you have always been worthy. It says love is rare, when in truth, real love is abundant. It says approval is limited, when in truth, self-respect frees you from needing it. Once you see the illusion for what it is, you stop begging for scraps at tables built on scarcity. You walk away, knowing that what is truly valuable doesn't need velvet ropes, limited editions, or emotional gatekeeping to prove its worth. Because real worth is not about being one of the few, it's about being fully yourself, no audition required.